This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've never really shared this with anyone outside my family. It's been 2 years, and I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. I was 15, and my parents decided to go out for their anniversary dinner at this fancy place downtown. It was the first time they'd left me completely alone overnight, and honestly, I was pretty excited about it. I'd been begging them for months to treat me like the responsible, almost adult I thought I was. It was a Friday in October, unusually cold that year. The weather forecast had mentioned potential storms, but nothing serious enough to cancel plans over. My parents left around 6 in the evening after going through their usual list of rules and emergency contacts. My dad made me promise not to open the door for anyone, and my mum left money for pizza on the counter. As soon as they pulled out of the driveway, I felt this weird mix of freedom and nervousness. I decided to make the most of my night alone. I grabbed a bag of chips, some soda, and settled on the couch to watch this horror show everyone at school had been talking about. In hindsight, probably not the smartest choice given what happened later. Around 8 o'clock, the storm that had been threatening all day finally hit. The wind picked up drastically, howling against the windows like something from a movie. Rain pounded on the roof, and occasional thunder rumbled in the distance. I tried to focus on my show, but the weather was making me jumpy. Our house is in this quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happens, which somehow made everything feel worse. I was just getting to a really tense part of the show when I heard it, a rustling sound coming from the back of the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind blowing tree branches against the siding. We have this big oak tree that scrapes against the house whenever it's windy. I turned up the volume and tried to ignore it, but then there was another sound, different from the first, more deliberate, like something was moving around near our back porch. I paused the show and sat there listening, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The house was making all sorts of weird noises because of the storm. That had to be it. Then I heard a louder thud, like something had bumped against the back door. My heart started racing. I sat frozen on the couch for what felt like forever, straining to hear any other sounds over the storm. When I didn't hear anything else for a few minutes, I got up, grabbing my phone just in case. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just the wind blowing something over on the porch. I walked to the kitchen, turning on every light as I went. Everything looked normal. The dishes my mom had washed before leaving were still drying on the rack. My half-eaten sandwich from earlier was still on the counter. Nothing seemed out of place. I was about to head back to the living room when something made me look toward the back door. We have this small window in the door that looks out onto the backyard. I don't know what made me go check it, maybe some instinct or something. But I walked over and peered outside. The yard was dark, but I could make out the outline of our fence and my dad's tool shed thanks to the neighbor's porch light. That's when I saw it. Movement at the edge of our yard, near the gate that leads to the side of the house. A dark figure was standing there, completely still. I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my back. At first, I thought maybe it was Mr. Thompson from next door coming to check if everything was okay during the storm, but this figure wasn't moving like a concerned neighbor would. It was just watching the house. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried calling my parents, but both their phones went straight to voicemail. They had mentioned something about the restaurant being in a dead zone for cell service. I considered calling 911. But what would I say? There's someone standing in my yard? I didn't even know if they had done anything wrong yet. I peeked out the window again, and my blood went cold. The figure had moved closer to the house. They were about halfway across the yard now, and even through the rain and darkness, I could tell they were looking directly at the back door, at me. I ran to my parents' bedroom and grabbed my dad's baseball bat from under their bed. He kept it there just in case, and I'd always thought he was being paranoid. Now I was grateful. I also grabbed the house phone and dialed 911, but kept my finger hovering over the call button, not pressing it yet. I went back to the kitchen window. The figure was gone. I frantically checked all the windows I could see from inside, trying to figure out where they'd gone. Had they left? Were they hiding? Were they trying to find a way in? Then the doorbell rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Who rings a doorbell if they're trying to break in? I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. The doorbell rang again, followed by a knock. Something about that knock didn't feel right. It wasn't the normal rhythm of someone checking if anyone was home. It was slow, deliberate, almost like they knew I was standing on the other side listening. I don't know what came over me, maybe adrenaline, maybe stupidity, but I crept to the front door and looked through the peephole. There was someone in a dark hoodie standing on our porch, their face hidden. They were just standing there, not moving. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the bat. I pressed the call button on the phone and whispered my address to the 911 operator, explaining there was someone trying to get into my house. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way, but it would take about 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The person knocked again, harder this time. Then I heard them trying the doorknob. It was locked, thankfully, but hearing that handle jiggle made something snap inside me. I don't know what possessed me, but I shouted through the door, "I've called the police. They're on their way right now." The movement at the door stopped. I thought maybe they'd run off, but then I heard footsteps on the porch, moving toward the living room windows. I ran after the sound, still clutching the phone and bat. Through the curtains, I could see the hooded figure peering in, trying to see inside. Without thinking, I pulled open the front door. In that moment, my fear turned into some kind of weird courage. I stood in the doorway with the bat raised, yelling, "Get away from my house!" The hooded figure turned toward me. I couldn't see their face clearly, but something about their posture changed, like they were surprised I'd confronted them. They took a step back when they saw the bat. I took a wild swing in their direction, not actually trying to hit them, just trying to scare them off. It worked. They backed away, then turned and ran toward the street. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and slid down to the floor, my whole body trembling. The 911 operator was still on the line, asking if I was okay. I told her what happened, and she told me to stay inside with the doors locked until the police arrived. I sat there with my back against the door, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak and groan from the storm outside. About 5 minutes later, the power went out. The entire house went pitch black in an instant. The only light came from my phone screen and the occasional flash of lightning. I nearly screamed. The operator tried to calm me down, telling me it was probably just the storm affecting the power lines. She was still talking when I heard it, footsteps circling the house. Slow, deliberate steps on the wet grass, moving from window to window. I crawled away from the door into the living room where I couldn't be seen from any windows. The footsteps continued around the house, pausing occasionally like they were checking each window. The operator told me the police were 2 minutes away, but it felt like hours. Then the footsteps stopped. Everything went quiet except for the rain and thunder. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the storm. Nothing. I used my phone's flashlight to look around the dark living room. Nothing seemed out of place. Maybe they had given up and left. That's when I heard a noise from the kitchen, a soft scraping sound followed by a quiet thud. My stomach dropped. Someone was inside my house. I whispered to the 911 operator that I thought the person had gotten in. She told me to find a safe place to hide immediately. I crawled toward the hallway closet, moving as silently as possible. I could hear someone moving around in the kitchen, drawers opening, cabinet doors closing. They weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. I was halfway to the closet when my phone died, just completely shut off. I'd been watching videos all evening and hadn't charged it. The house phone I'd been using for 911 went dead too. The power outage had killed the cordless base station. I was alone in the dark with someone in my kitchen. I froze, afraid even breathing would give away my position. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the hallway. In that split second of light, I saw a shadow move across the wall. Someone was coming from the kitchen. I pressed myself against the wall, gripping the bat with sweaty hands. Another flash of lightning, and I saw them, a figure standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. They were still wearing the hoodie, but something was different. In the brief flash of light, I could see their face, or rather, I couldn't see it. Where their face should have been was just shadow, except for two unnaturally wide eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, and a smile that was too wide, too wrong. I must have made a sound, because their heads snapped in my direction. Then they started moving toward me, not running, but walking with this weird, jerky movement that didn't look natural. I didn't think, I just reacted. When they got close enough, I swung the bat as hard as I could. It connected with something solid. There was a grunt of pain and the figure stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the locks with shaking hands. I burst outside into the rain and ran straight to Mr. Thompson's house next door. I pounded on his door, screaming for help. When he opened it, I collapsed into his entryway, sobbing and trying to explain what had happened. His wife called 911 while he grabbed his own baseball bat and stood guard at their front door. The police arrived 5 minutes later. They searched my house top to bottom but found no one. The back door was unlocked and slightly ajar. That's how they must have gotten in. There were muddy footprints in the kitchen and living room that weren't mine. The police found a kitchen knife on the floor that had been taken from our knife block, but there was no sign of the person themselves. They increased patrols in our neighborhood for the next few weeks, but they never found whoever it was. My parents came home immediately when they finally got my messages. I slept in their room for a month afterward. It's been 2 years, and I still can't shake the memory of those eyes in the darkness, that unnatural smile. Sometimes I wake up convinced someone is standing in the corner of my room, watching me. I check the locks on all our doors and windows obsessively now. The police said it was probably just some opportunist who saw my parents leave and thought the house would be empty. But that doesn't explain the way they moved, the way they looked at me. It doesn't explain why they stood in our yard watching the house before trying to get in. I don't like being alone in the house anymore, even during the day. Some feelings of safety, once lost, can never fully return. I know now that the places we consider sanctuaries are just buildings with doors that can be opened and windows that can be broken. The barriers between us and danger are thinner than we want to believe. Story 2. I still can't believe what happened to me 3 weeks ago. I've barely slept since then, and every time I close my eyes, I see her face. Those eyes. God, those hollow eyes. I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what I saw. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Oregon. It was late, probably around 11:30 at night, and I was exhausted. I'd been on the road for about 6 hours, and Highway 5 through Northern California was practically deserted. You know how it gets at night on those stretches. Just darkness, your headlights, and the occasional semi-truck barreling past. My gas light had been on for about 20 miles, and I was starting to get nervous. Cell reception was spotty, and the last thing I wanted was to run out of gas in the middle of nowhere. When I spotted the flickering lights of a gas station up ahead, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. As I pulled off the highway, I realized this wasn't one of those big chain stations. It was one of those old-school places with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store attached. The sign was partially burned out, something like Pine Ridge Gas and Mart, but half the letters were missing. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting this weird bluish glow over everything. I pulled up to the pump and got out. The air felt unusually cold for summer, and there was this strange stillness. You know that feeling when the air pressure changes before a storm? It was like that, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky, just stars and a half-moon casting. Weak light over the tree line across the road. The pump was ancient, no card reader, so I had to go inside first. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and an old man behind the counter barely looked up from his magazine. He took my $20 without saying much, just mumbled, "Pump 3." The whole place smelled like beef jerky and cigarettes. When I went back outside to pump my gas, that's when I first heard it. This melody, like someone humming a lullaby but slightly off-key. It was faint at first, and I thought maybe it was coming from inside the store. But as I stood there with my hand on the pump, it got clearer. I looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from, and that's when I saw her. Standing at the edge of the tree line across the road from the gas station was a woman in a white dress. Not like a wedding dress, more like an old-fashioned nightgown that went down to her ankles. Even from that distance, I could see her long, dark hair moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. My first thought was that she needed help. Who stands alone by the woods at midnight wearing what looked like sleepwear? I called out, "Hello? Are you okay?" But she didn't respond. She just stood there staring in my direction. Something told me to just get in my car and drive away, but instead I finished pumping my gas and then, like an idiot in a horror movie, I started walking across the road toward her. I know, absolutely insane, but I was worried. What if she was hurt or lost? As I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. Her skin was pale, not just fair, but almost translucent in the moonlight. And her eyes, God, her eyes. They were dark, almost like empty sockets, but filled with this profound sadness that made my stomach knot up. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, but there was something ageless about her face. When I was about 15 feet away, she spoke. Her voice sounded like it was coming from far away, even though she was right in front of me. "They left me," she whispered. Her lips barely moved. "They said they would come back." I froze in my tracks. "Who left you? Do you need help? I can call someone." She took a step toward me, and I swear the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. I could see my breath suddenly fogging in front of my face. "Sarah waited," she said, and I realized she was talking about herself in the third person. "Sarah always waits. They promised." I was about to respond when headlights cut through the darkness. A pickup truck had pulled off the highway and was approaching the gas station. The woman, Sarah, looked toward the lights, and her face contorted with what looked like terror. "No, no, no," she whispered frantically. "He always finds me. He knows I can't leave." Before I could say anything else, she turned and fled into the woods. I mean, she moved so fast it was unnatural. One second she was there, and the next she was just gone, swallowed by the darkness between the trees. I stood there frozen, staring at the spot where she'd disappeared. The pickup truck pulled up beside me, and a man rolled down his window. He was middle-aged with a scruffy gray beard and wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, worn down. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. His voice was gruff but not unkind, especially not at night. "There was a woman," I said, pointing toward the woods. "She seemed scared or confused. She ran into the forest when you drove up." The man sighed and ran a hand over his face. "Was she wearing white, long dark hair?" My blood went cold. "Yes. She said her name was Sarah." He nodded slowly, like he'd heard this 100 times before. "That's what she calls herself. Look, I don't know what you believe in, but that woman, or whatever she is, has been seen around here for years, decades even." "What do you mean, whatever she is?" I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. "Sarah. Meadows went missing in 1978. She was waiting for her boyfriend to pick her up from this very gas station. He never showed. The story goes that she walked into those woods to try to find her way to the nearest town. They found her car here, but they never found her." I felt sick. "That's impossible. I just spoke to her." He gave me a long look. "People around here say she's cursed, can't find her way back, can't move on. Every few months someone reports seeing her, always in that white nightgown, always at the edge of the trees. She's not right, not dangerous exactly, but not right." "Has anyone tried to help her?" I asked. His expression darkened. Last person who followed her into those woods was a trucker back in 2008. Guy named Mike Ferris. He never came back out. Search parties combed those woods for weeks, never found a trace of him. I looked back at the dark tree line, half expecting to see her standing there again, but there was nothing. My advice, the man continued, get in your car and drive away. Don't look back. Don't stop again until you reach Reading or wherever you're headed. Who are you? I asked. How do you know all this? He started rolling up his window. Just someone who's lived here long enough to know better. Drive safe and stay on the highway. Before I could ask anything else, he drove off toward the gas station. I stood there for another minute staring into the woods, then practically ran back to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove like hell after that, way over the speed limit, not stopping until I reached another gas station about 40 miles south. This one was a modern Shell station with bright lights and several cars parked outside. I went inside to buy a coffee, desperate to warm up and calm my nerves. The attendant, a young guy probably in his early 20s, noticed how shaken I was and asked if everything was okay. I don't know why, but I ended up telling him what had happened. I expected him to laugh or think I was crazy, but he didn't. You saw the Highway 5 ghost, he said, his voice dropping. My uncle's a state trooper. They get calls about her all the time, but they don't even respond anymore unless there's a report of an actual missing person. So it's real. She's real? I asked. He shrugged. Depends on what you mean by real. There are definitely stories going back decades. Always the same description. Woman in white, asking for help, saying someone left her. Most people say she's the ghost of a girl who died out there, but no one knows for sure. I asked him if he knew anything about the man in the pickup truck, but he shook his head. Probably just a local. Lots of people around here know the stories. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I finally got home the next day, I spent hours researching online. I found old newspaper articles about Sarah Meadows, a 19-year-old college student who disappeared from a gas station on Highway 5 in the summer of 1978. Her boyfriend claimed he was running late to pick her up, but by the time he arrived, her car was there but she was gone. He was investigated but eventually cleared. I also found mentions of Michael Ferris, a long-haul trucker who went missing in 2008. His truck was found at the same gas station, and witnesses reported he had been talking about helping a woman who seemed lost. I haven't driven on Highway 5 since that night. I take the longer coastal route now, even though it adds hours to my trip. I keep thinking about Sarah, about those hollow eyes, and that profound sadness. Was she trying to warn me? Was she trying to lure me into the woods? Would I have disappeared like Michael Ferris if I had followed her? Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear that humming, that off-key lullaby, and I wonder if Sarah is still there, standing at the edge of the trees, waiting for someone who promised to come back but never did. I wonder if she'll always be there, trapped between worlds, telling her story to anyone who stops. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or curses or any of that, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. And I know that somewhere on Highway 5 there's a woman in white who's been waiting for over 40 years, and I hope to God she eventually finds whatever it is she's looking for, because the alternative, that she's trapped there forever, is too heartbreaking to imagine. Story 3. I've been a police officer for 15 years, and until last month, I thought I'd seen just about everything the job could throw at me. Domestic disputes, overdoses, car accidents, even a few shootings. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened at the Miller farm. It was a foggy November night, about 2 months ago. The kind of fog that seems to swallow your flashlight beam after a few feet. I was working the night shift alone, which wasn't uncommon for our small department. The radio crackled around 11:30 with a call about suspicious activity at the old Miller property. You know, that abandoned farmhouse about 3 miles outside city limits. The one that's been sitting empty since old man Miller died back in the 90s. Dispatch said a neighbor reported seeing flashlights moving around inside. Probably just teenagers looking for a place to drink or mess around, I figured. I've broken up dozens of those parties over the years. No big deal. The property sits at the end of this long gravel driveway, partially hidden by overgrown trees. As I pulled up, my headlights caught the reflection of the broken windows. The place was in worse shape than I remembered. Roof sagging in the middle, porch steps rotted through, paint peeling off like dead skin. I sat in my cruiser for a minute, just taking it in. Something felt off. The hair on my arms was standing up before I even got out of the car. I grabbed my flashlight and approached cautiously. The front door was ajar, which made sense if kids had broken in. I announced myself, standard procedure, but got no response. Just the sound of the wind pushing through the broken windows. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I stepped inside. The air felt thick and smelled like mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sour. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing old furniture draped in white sheets. Everything was covered in a layer of dust so thick you could write your name in it. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like some kind of twisted decoration. I did a quick sweep of the main floor, living room, kitchen, dining room. Nothing seemed disturbed, no beer cans, no cigarette butts, none of the usual signs that kids had been there. I was beginning to think the call was bogus when I heard it, a soft sobbing sound coming from upstairs. "Hello? Police officer, is someone up there?" I called out, my hand instinctively moving to rest on my holstered weapon. The crying continued, barely audible. A woman, from the sound of it. I made my way up the stairs, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The staircase groaned and shifted beneath me. At the top was a narrow hallway with 4 doors, all closed except one at the far end, which was cracked open slightly. The sobbing was coming from that room. I approached slowly, calling out again. No response except for the continued crying. When I pushed the door open, my flashlight revealed a bedroom, an old iron bed frame with no mattress, a broken dresser, and peeling wallpaper. Sitting in the corner was a young woman, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair covering most of her face. She wore what looked like a tattered white nightgown, dirty and stained. She was hugging her knees to her chest, rocking slightly. "Miss, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my distance. In my experience, people in distress can be unpredictable. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered, "they won't let me go." Then she raised a trembling hand and pointed to the corner opposite her. I swung my flashlight in that direction, but saw nothing. Just an empty corner with peeling wallpaper and cobwebs. "Who won't let you go?" I asked, taking a step closer. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" That's when it happened. The shadows in the room. They moved. Not like when a light source shifts. This was different. They moved independently, like they were alive, flowing across the walls, stretching and contracting. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. When I looked back at the woman, her entire demeanor had changed. Her posture straightened, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and her face, Jesus, her face. What had been a look of fear was now a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across her face. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, but her voice wasn't the same. It was deeper, distorted, like multiple voices speaking at once. Before I could react, the door behind me slammed shut with such force that dust rained down from the ceiling. I spun around, grabbing the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. Locked or jammed, I couldn't tell. Then the whispers started, quiet at first, then growing louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Different voices, different tones, but all saying similar things. "Help us. Don't leave us here. Join us. Stay." My training kicked in, and I drew my weapon, pointing it at the woman who was now standing, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. "Ma'am, I need you to stay where you are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear that was now crawling up my spine. She tilted her head further, until it was nearly resting on her shoulder. Her grin widened even more, impossibly wide, and she hissed, "You can't save her. She's one of us now." The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The shadows on the walls seemed to be reaching for me. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I panicked. I holstered my weapon, turned, and slammed my shoulder into the door repeatedly until it finally gave way. I practically fell into the hallway and scrambled to my feet. The woman's laughter followed me as I ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time, not caring about how unstable they were. I burst out of that house and didn't stop running until I reached my cruiser. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled away, I looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, not the room I'd been in, but a different one, I saw a face watching me, just for a second, illuminated by what? I don't know. Then it was gone. I drove straight back to the station and tried to explain what happened to my sergeant. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, said I was probably just stressed from working too many night shifts alone, suggested I take a few days off. I didn't argue. I needed time to process what I'd experienced. For weeks, I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, or maybe something I'd breathed in at that old house, some kind of mold that causes hallucinations. I almost had myself believing it. Then, a month later, I got called back to the Miller farm. This time, it was broad daylight, a cold, clear December afternoon. A hiker reported seeing someone who might be injured inside the property. I tried to get someone else to take the call, but we were short-staffed, and my sergeant gave me that look that said, "Get over whatever happened last time." So I went. In daylight, the place didn't look nearly as intimidating. Just an old, decrepit farmhouse slowly being reclaimed by nature. I approached with caution, announcing myself loudly before entering. Inside, everything looked the same: dusty furniture, cobwebs, broken floorboards. But as I moved through the house, something strange began to happen. The decay seemed to reverse itself. It was subtle at first, the dust disappearing, the colors becoming more vibrant. Then it accelerated. Before my eyes, the house transformed. The broken furniture repaired itself. Warm light filled the rooms, replacing the cold winter sunlight. I could smell food cooking, roast beef maybe, and fresh bread. I heard children laughing somewhere in the house. I stood frozen in the middle of what had been the living room but was now a well-kept, comfortable space with a fire crackling in the fireplace. This wasn't like last time. This felt inviting, welcoming, like coming home after a long day. A voice called out from another room, "Come join us. We've been waiting for you." I felt drawn toward the voice. Part of me knew this wasn't real, that I needed to leave immediately, but another part, a stronger part, wanted to see who was calling me, to be part of whatever warmth and joy existed here. I took a step forward, then another. As I moved deeper into the house, I began to notice things at the edges of my vision, silhouettes moving through the shadows, never quite visible when I turned to look directly at them, and voices, whispering, pleading, "Help us. Don't leave. Stay with us forever." I reached what should have been the kitchen, but was now a dining room with a long table set for a feast. Empty chairs waited for guests. At the head of the table stood a figure with its back to me. "We saved you a seat," it said, slowly turning around. I never saw its face. Something inside me, some survival instinct, finally broke through the trance. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back in my cruiser with the doors locked. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The house was back to its decrepit state, but in an upstairs window stood a figure watching me go. Not the woman from before, but something else. Something that only resembled a person in the vaguest sense. I haven't been back to the Miller farm since then. I requested a transfer to day shift and haven't worked a night since. My sergeant thinks I'm dealing with some kind of PTSD, maybe from an old case. He doesn't know that I still dream about that house almost every night, about the voices calling me back. Sometimes when I'm driving home late, I find myself taking routes that pass near the old farm property, like something's pulling me there. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see lights in those broken windows. Warm, inviting lights. Whatever lives in the Miller farm is patient. It can wait. It knows I'll be back eventually. We all will. Story 4. I can't believe it's been 4 months since that night along the Maine coast, and I still wake up in a cold sweat almost every night. I've never shared this with anyone except my therapist, who suggested writing it down might help, so here goes. It was late October, just before Halloween. I'd taken a few days off work to clear my head after a brutal quarter at the marketing firm where I work. My plan was simple: drive up the coast to a small B&B in Bar Harbor, spend a few days hiking and reading, then head back to Portland refreshed. I left around 4 in the afternoon, thinking I'd enjoy the sunset drive along Route 1. The weather was perfect that evening, crisp and cool, with that distinct autumn smell of salt air and fallen leaves. I had my playlist going, windows cracked just enough to hear the waves crashing against the cliffs below the highway. The sun was setting, painting everything in this deep orange glow that made even the bare trees look beautiful. I'd just passed through a small fishing town. I think it was somewhere between Rockport and Camden, when the road got really quiet, like eerily quiet. No other cars, just me and miles of winding coastal highway, with dense forest on one side and steep cliffs dropping to the ocean on the other. That's when my phone rang. I wasn't expecting any calls, but I figured it was probably my mom checking if I'd made it safely to the B&B yet. I clicked the button on my steering wheel to answer through Bluetooth. "Hello," I said, keeping my eyes on the road as it curved sharply around a particularly dense patch of woods. There was this weird static. Then a woman's voice came through, breathless and frantic. "Sarah? Sarah? Is that you? Oh, thank God, I've been trying to reach you. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong," I started to say, but she cut me off. "Please, you have to help me. I'm lost. I can't find my way back. I'm somewhere in the woods near that old cabin. They're coming. I can hear them. Please, Sarah." The desperation in her voice made my skin crawl. "I'm not Sarah," I said firmly. "You've called the wrong person." There was a pause. Then she whispered, "They're here," before the call dropped completely. I pulled over, my heart racing. I checked my phone, but there was no call history. No unknown number. Nothing. I told myself it was just a prank call with bad reception, but I couldn't shake how genuinely terrified that woman had sounded. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes trying to calm down when I noticed something through the trees, a faint yellowish light flickering between the trunks, maybe 100 yards off the road. It was barely visible in the growing darkness, but definitely there. My first thought was that maybe someone was actually lost in the woods. Maybe that call had been real and somehow redirected to my phone by mistake. I debated calling 911, but what would I say? That I got a weird call and saw a light in the woods, with no actual evidence of an emergency. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just drive away? That would have been the smart thing to do. But something about that woman's voice kept replaying in my head. What if someone really was in trouble out there? I grabbed my phone and flashlight from the glove compartment, locked my car, and started walking toward the light. The forest floor was covered in crunchy leaves and pine needles, making it impossible to move quietly. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since sunset, and my breath came out in little clouds. As I got closer, I realized the light was coming from what looked like an old cabin. Not a nice vacation cabin. This thing was practically falling apart. Weathered gray boards, a sagging roof, windows so dirty you could barely see through them. The kind of place that should have been torn down years ago. The light I'd seen was coming from inside. A flickering yellow glow that I assumed was a candle or lantern. Maybe someone was squatting there, or maybe it was a hunter's shelter. Either way, I approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there? Do you need help?" No answer. Just the wind rustling through the trees and distant waves crashing against the shore below the cliffs. I reached the cabin and knocked on the door. When nobody answered, I tried the handle. It wasn't locked. The door creaked open, and I immediately felt a wave of cold air rush past me. "Hello?" I called again. shining my flashlight inside. The cabin was a single room with a tiny kitchenette in one corner, a threadbare couch, and a small table with 2 chairs. There was a candle burning on the table, one of those big jar candles that smelled like cinnamon. The place was dusty but not completely abandoned. There were dishes in the sink, an open book on the couch, and a jacket hanging by the door. "Is anyone here?" I stepped inside, keeping the door open behind me. That's when it happened. A gust of wind, at least that's what I told myself it was, slammed the door shut behind me. The candle flickered wildly, casting jumping shadows across the walls, then settled back to a steady flame. I turned to reopen the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. I pulled harder, starting to panic when I heard it, whispering, so faint at first that I thought it might be the wind outside or my imagination. But then it got clearer, voices overlapping in harsh, hushed tones. "You shouldn't have come here. You brought us back. Not supposed to leave. Sarah sent you." I spun around, shining my flashlight in every corner. "Who's there? This isn't funny." No one was there, but the whispers continued, growing louder. The shadows on the walls seemed to move independently of the candle's flame, stretching and contracting like living things. I tried the door again, throwing my whole body against it. Nothing. I was about to break a window when suddenly the door swung open on its own, so violently it slammed against the outside wall. I didn't hesitate. I ran, sprinted through the woods toward my car, branches slapping my face, roots trying to trip me. The whole time, I felt something behind me. Not footsteps exactly, but a presence, closing in. Something cold brushed against my neck, then my arm, like fingers trying to grab me. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and practically dove inside. As I slammed the door and hit the lock button, I caught a glimpse of something. Not a clear shape, more like darker patches of darkness moving between the trees. I started the engine and peeled out, tires spitting gravel. I drove like a maniac for at least 20 minutes, constantly checking my rearview mirror. Nothing followed, at least nothing I could see. When I finally hit Camden, I pulled into a well-lit gas station parking lot and sat there shaking for almost an hour. I convinced myself I'd imagined it all. The stress of work, the isolation of that stretch of road, the creepy phone call that probably had a logical explanation. My mind had played tricks on me. That's what I told myself. I continued to the B&B in Bar Harbor, checked in around 10 that night, and tried to enjoy my mini-vacation. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The innkeeper commented that I looked pale, asked if I was coming down with something. I blamed it on the long drive. The nightmares started that first night. Always the same. I'm back in that cabin, but the walls are breathing. The whispers tell me they've been waiting for me. They say I belong with them now. I wake up gasping for air, sheets soaked with sweat. I cut my trip short and drove home after just 2 nights, taking the inland route instead of the coastal highway. I thought being back in my apartment in Portland would help. It didn't. 3 days after I got home, my phone rang at exactly 3:17 in the morning. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message, there was nothing but static and what sounded like whispering too faint to make out. This has happened 14 times now. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always an unknown number. Always whispers just below the threshold of understanding. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what's been happening in my apartment. Items move when I'm not looking. My keys weren't where I left them. A book appeared on my coffee table that I don't remember buying. Last week I found wet footprints leading from my bathroom to my bedroom, small like a child's, but when I followed them they just stopped in the middle of the floor. Sometimes at night I wake up to find my bedroom door open when I know I closed it. Twice I found that cinnamon candle from the cabin on my kitchen counter. I throw it away each time, but it comes back. The whispers have followed me home. They're in the walls now. They call me by name, my real name, not Sarah. They say they've been waiting for someone like me. They say the woman on the phone was bait. They say I brought them back with me when I left that cabin. My therapist thinks it's stress-induced hallucinations. My doctor prescribed sleeping pills that don't work. I've thought about moving, but somehow I know they'd just follow me. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened to me if something happens. The whispers are getting louder. Last night, I woke up and there was someone sitting at the foot of my bed. When I turned on the light, nobody was there, but my sheets were cold where they had been sitting. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know what they want from me. All I know is that I never should have followed that light into the woods, and I never should have entered that cabin. Something came back with me that night, and I don't think it's ever going to leave. Story 5. I still can't sleep right after what happened last week. I keep checking my doors and windows, and I've called in sick to work 3 days in a row now. I need to get this out somewhere, even if no one believes me. I don't care anymore. I just need someone to hear what happened to me on Route 66. I was driving back from visiting my mom in Albuquerque. She's been sick lately, and I stayed longer than planned, which meant I had to drive through the night to make it back to work the next day. It was around midnight when I hit that desolate stretch of old Route 66 in western New Mexico. You know the kind, where your headlights only illuminate a small patch of road ahead, and everything else is just endless darkness. I'd been stupid and let my gas get dangerously low. The needle was hovering just above empty, and my GPS showed nothing for the next 30 miles. I started to panic a little. Breaking down out there in the middle of nowhere with barely any cell service. Not exactly how I wanted to spend my night. Just when I was calculating how much farther I could push it, I saw something in the distance, a faint glow against the pitch-black horizon. As I got closer, I made out a flickering neon sign that read, "Last Chance Gas." The sign buzzed and sputtered, going dark for seconds at a time before lighting up. Again, I nearly cried with relief. The place looked ancient and run down, just one pump standing lonely under a cracked concrete awning and a small convenience store with dirty windows. But at that moment, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. I pulled up to the pump and got out. The air was eerily still and cold. No cars passed by on the road. No sounds except the hum of the neon sign and the soft ping of my car's engine cooling down. The whole place had this weird yellowish light that made everything look jaundiced and sick. I tried the pump, but it was the old kind that needed to be activated from inside. So I headed toward the store, my footsteps crunching on gravel that seemed way too loud in the silence. The bell above the door gave a dull ring as I walked in. The inside was like stepping back in time. Faded product displays, ancient-looking candy bars, and dusty shelves with items I hadn't seen since I was a kid. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered and buzzed, giving me an instant headache. Behind the counter stood an old man with wild gray hair sticking out in all directions. He was so thin his clothes hung off him like they were on a wire hanger. His skin was papery and spotted with age, but his eyes, they were oddly bright and alert, watching me intently as I approached. "Evening," he said, his voice scratchy like sandpaper. "Don't get many folks this late." "Yeah, I'm running on fumes out there," I said, sliding my credit card across the counter. "Could you turn on pump one for me?" He looked at my card but didn't take it. "Cash only out here. Machines don't work reliable with the power the way it is." I dug through my wallet and found $40. "This enough to fill it?" He nodded slowly, taking the money and punching something into an ancient register. "Where you headed this time of night?" "Flagstaff," I said, not wanting to give too much information. Something about him made me uneasy. "Long way to go yet," he commented, his eyes never leaving my face. "Dangerous stretch of road ahead. Not safe to drive tired." "I'll be fine," I assured him, anxious to get my gas and leave. He leaned forward slightly. "You know, people disappear on this road sometimes, just vanish. Car found empty, no sign of where they went." A chill ran down my spine. "Is that right?" Just last month, young woman about your age. Pretty thing. They found her car right off the shoulder about 10 miles west of here. Door open, purse still inside. Never found her though. I forced a smile. Well, I'll be careful. Just need to fill up and I'll be on my way. That's when I heard it. A thud from somewhere in the back of the store, followed by what sounded like a muffled voice. My heart practically stopped. The old man's expression didn't change. "Damn raccoons," he said flatly. "Always getting into the storeroom. Been trying to catch 'em for weeks." But raccoons don't make sounds like human voices. I was sure of it. "Pump's on," he said, nodding toward the door. "You fill up now. Store's closing soon." I hurried outside, the bell jingling nervously behind me. My hands were shaking as I pumped the gas. I kept glancing at the store windows, but couldn't see much through the grime except the old man's silhouette moving around inside. When the tank was full, I debated whether to go back inside for my change. Something told me to just leave, but I needed that money for the rest of my trip. Taking a deep breath, I headed back to the store. The old man was waiting at the counter with my change already counted out. "Drive safe now," he said as he handed me the bills. "Stay on the main road. Don't stop for nobody." I mumbled thanks and practically ran back to my car. As I pulled away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw him standing in the doorway watching me leave. The neon sign flickered once more and then went completely dark, like the place had never existed at all. I drove faster than I should have, just wanting to put distance between me and that creepy gas station. My mind kept replaying that thud, that muffled voice. What was really in that back room? I'd gone maybe 5 miles when I saw her, a woman standing at the roadside. She wore what looked like a white dress and her hair blew slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel inside my car. My headlights caught her for just a second, and I swear to God she looked right at me and pointed directly at my car. I blinked, and she was gone, just vanished. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks, that she was probably just a hitchhiker and I'd missed seeing where she went. But deep down, I knew better. About 15 minutes later, I saw another gas station up ahead. This one looked even more run down than the first. No neon sign, just a dim light above a single pump. Under normal circumstances, I would have driven right past, but after seeing that woman, I felt like I needed to stop somewhere with people, even if just for a minute, to calm my nerves. I pulled in and parked near the pump, even though I didn't need gas anymore. The building was concrete block, painted a faded blue, with bars on the windows. Not exactly welcoming, but at least it was open. As I approached the door, I realized something was off. The place was too quiet. No sound of a radio or TV inside, no hum of refrigerators. And the light I'd seen from the road wasn't coming from inside the store. It was just a security light above the door. I peered through the dirty window. The inside was dark, except for a small light coming from somewhere in the back. I should have left right then, but something made me try the door. It opened with a creak. "Hello?" I called out, stepping cautiously inside. "Anybody here?" No answer, but as my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I could make out a counter, some shelves, and a door behind the counter that was slightly ajar, with light spilling through the crack. That's when I heard it, a soft crying sound coming from the back room, then a voice, clearly female, calling out weakly, "Help! Please, someone help me!" My instinct screamed at me to run, but how could I leave if someone was hurt? I moved behind the counter and pushed the door open wider. The back room was small and lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, and there, huddled in the corner on the concrete floor, was a woman in tattered clothes. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, like she'd been tied up but had gotten free. Her face was bruised, her hair matted. "Oh my God," I gasped, rushing to her side. "What happened? Are you okay?" She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "He'll be back soon," she whispered. "Please, you have to help me get out of here before he comes back." Who did this to you?" I asked, helping her to her feet. She was about to answer when we heard the front door of the store open. The woman froze, her fingers digging into my arm painfully. "Anyone here?" called a familiar scratchy voice. The old man from the first gas station. The woman started shaking violently. "It's him," she mouthed silently. I don't know where I found the courage, but I pulled her toward a back door I'd spotted in the corner of the room. We slipped outside just as I heard the old man's footsteps entering the back room. We ran to my car, the woman barely able to keep up. I practically shoved her into the passenger seat before jumping in myself and starting the engine. As we peeled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse of the old man standing in the doorway, just watching us go. Not running after us, not yelling, just watching with those unnaturally bright eyes. Once we were back on the highway, the woman broke down, sobbing. I asked her name. "Ellie," she said between sobs. "My name is Ellie Lewis." "I'm Casey," I told her. "What happened to you? How did you end up there?" She took several deep breaths before answering. "I was driving this road 5 days ago. It was late, and I swerved to avoid hitting something. A coyote, I think. My car went off the road and hit a tree. When I woke up, I was in that room. He was there. He said I had to stay with him, that the road had chosen me." "The road had chosen you? What does that mean?" I asked, glancing nervously in my rearview mirror. The highway behind us was empty. "I don't know," she said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "He kept saying things that didn't make sense, that he was the keeper of the road, that some people were meant to stay. She choked up. "He said no one would look for me there because the stations only appear to those the road wants." I felt sick. "Stations? Plural?" She nodded. "He moves between them. Sometimes I was at one, sometimes the other. I don't understand how. They don't seem real somehow." We drove in silence for a while, both trying to process what was happening. Finally, I saw the lights of a larger town ahead and nearly cried with relief. I pulled into the first well-lit gas station I saw, a modern chain store with bright fluorescent lighting and several cars at the pumps. For the first time in hours, I felt safe. "Wait here," I told Ellie. "I'm going to call the police." Inside, I asked the cashier to call 911. While waiting, I mentioned to him where we'd come from. His face changed immediately. "You came through the hollow stretch?" he asked, using a local name I hadn't heard before. "I guess so. There's this stretch of old Route 66 where the phantom stations appear," he finished for me. "People around here know not to drive that road at night. Those who do either make it through without stopping or they don't make it through at all." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "That stretch of highway has a history. Disappearances going back decades. Local legend says there's these gas stations that only appear at night to travelers in need. But they're not real places, at least not anymore. They were real once back in the 50s until the owners were killed by a drifter who took over the properties. He died in prison in the 70s, but people say he somehow bound himself to those places, that he's still there, still taking people." I thought about the old man, how he seemed to appear at both stations, how the first station vanished after I left. That's just a story, right?" The cashier shrugged. "Maybe. But there's been at least 7 people gone missing on that stretch in the past 2 years. Cars found abandoned, no trace of the drivers. Highway patrol increased patrols, put up cameras, nothing. And the weird thing is, there aren't any gas stations on that stretch of road. Haven't been for 30 years. I ran back to my car, needing to tell Ellie what I'd learned. But when I opened the passenger door, the seat was empty. No sign she had ever been there. The police came and took my statement. They looked at me like I was crazy or on drugs. They checked the security cameras from the gas station. They showed me driving in alone, getting out alone, going inside alone. No passenger, no Ellie. They ran the name Ellie Lewis and found nothing about a missing person with that name. They did, however, tell me about a woman named Eleanor Whitman who went missing on that stretch of road in 1986. They showed me her picture from the old case file. It was her, the woman I'd helped escape, but she hadn't aged a day in 37 years. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if I saved Ellie or if she saved me. All I know is that I was targeted by something inhuman that lurks on that lonely highway, something that's been taking travelers for decades and will continue to wait in that liminal space between worlds for its next victim. I'm never driving at night again, and I'm definitely never taking Route 66. Story 6. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can help me make sense of what happened. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and crime is something you hear about on the news happening in big cities. My parents always said our town was safe, which is why they never worried about leaving me home alone, even overnight sometimes when I was a teenager. I actually loved having the house to myself, walking around in my pajamas, eating whatever I wanted, watching TV without anyone telling me to turn it down. That all changed last November. It was a Friday night and my parents had gone to see some movie they'd been waiting for. I remember it was pouring rain outside, that heavy, constant kind that creates a wall of sound against the windows. I was honestly glad to be inside. I'd made myself a huge bowl of popcorn and settled in on the couch to watch this horror movie I'd been wanting to see for ages. The irony isn't lost on me now. Around 9:30, I started hearing this tapping sound from somewhere in the back of the house. At first, I thought it was just the rain hitting the gutters or a branch scraping against a window, but it had this rhythm to it. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. Too consistent to be random. I paused my movie and listened. The sound continued. I grabbed my phone as a flashlight and walked toward the kitchen where the sound seemed to be coming from. My heart was already beating faster, though I kept telling myself it was nothing, probably just the ice maker in the fridge acting up or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. When I reached the back door, I could hear it clearly. Something, or someone, was tapping on the glass. I hesitated before approaching the door, which had a small window at eye level. The porch light was on, but the rain made everything blurry. I couldn't see anything clearly through the glass. Stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at the door, debating whether to look closer or run back to the living room and pretend I hadn't heard anything. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving just outside the circle of light from the porch lamp. Not an animal shadow, a person's shadow. My stomach dropped. I backed away from the door, making sure it was locked. The deadbolt was already in place, thank God. I retreated to the living room, grabbing my dad's baseball bat from the coat closet on the way. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone trying to text my friend Megan about what was happening. Me. Someone's outside my house. Parents aren't home. What do I do? I stared at my phone, willing her to respond immediately, but nothing came through. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I thought about calling my parents, but they were in a movie and wouldn't see it. I didn't want to call the police yet. What if it was just some neighbor who needed help or something? I'd feel stupid having cops show up for nothing. The tapping had stopped. I crept back toward the kitchen, bat in hand, and peeked around the corner. Through the back door window, I could see the figure more clearly now. It had moved closer to the door, into the porch light. It was a man, tall, wearing dark clothes, hood pulled up against the rain. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about the way he stood there, perfectly still, just staring at the house, made my skin crawl. Then he knocked. 3 loud, deliberate knocks that made me jump. "Hello?" His voice was muffled through the door and the sound of rain. "Is anyone home? I need help." I pressed myself against the wall, out of sight from the door window, trying to steady my breathing. He knocked again, louder this time. "Please, I saw the lights on. My car broke down on the road, and my phone's dead. I just need to use your phone to call for help." His story sounded reasonable, but something felt off. Why this house? There were other houses on our street with lights on, and the way he was just standing there, staring directly at the door like he knew someone was home. "I know someone's in there," he called out, his voice changing slightly. "I just need help, please." I texted my parents, someone at the back door saying he needs help. I'm scared, call me. The three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. My mom was typing something, but before her message came through, the power went out. Every light in the house, the TV, everything shut off at once, plunging me into complete darkness. The only light came from my phone screen and the faint glow of the moon through the rain-streaked windows. "Hello?" The man's voice came again, louder and more insistent. "The power's out. Are you okay in there? Let me in, I can help." How did he know the power had just gone out? He couldn't see inside from where he was standing, unless he had something to do with it. My phone buzzed. Mom had finally responded. "Who is it? Don't open the door. Dad's calling the police." The doorknob started rattling. He was trying to get in. "I know you're in there." His voice had changed completely now, lower, more urgent. "I can see you. Just let me in. You'll be sorry if you don't let me in right now." I was frozen in place, gripping the bat so hard my knuckles hurt. The rattling got more violent and I heard him slam against the door. The whole frame shook. I finally snapped out of it and ran to the front of the house away from the kitchen. I needed to find a better place to hide. I ducked into the downstairs bathroom. No windows, one door, lock on the inside. I closed and locked the door behind me, then turned on my phone's flashlight. The battery was at 27%. I turned the flashlight off to save power and sat on the edge of the bathtub in the dark, still clutching the bat. I could hear him moving around the house now, trying different doors and windows. The sound of glass breaking somewhere made me almost scream, but I covered my mouth with my hand. He was inside. He had gotten in. I heard footsteps moving through the house, slowly, deliberately, not trying to be quiet at all, like he wanted me to hear him coming. "I know you're still here," he called out, his voice echoing through the house. "I just want to talk to you." I turned my phone's flashlight back on briefly, looking around the bathroom for anything I could use as a weapon besides the bat. There was nothing. I turned the light off again and opened the camera on my phone, switching to the front-facing camera. I held it under the door, angling it to see into the hallway. I could see a beam of light sweeping across the floor. He had a flashlight. The footsteps got closer, and I pulled my phone back, holding my breath. The bathroom doorknob turned, but the lock held. He rattled it harder. "Open the door," he said, his voice right on the other side now. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need your help." I said nothing, gripping the bat tighter. I had never been so terrified in my life. "I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing." He slammed against the door, and I heard the wood crack. One more hit and it would give way. That's when I heard it, sirens in the distance getting closer. The man must have heard them too, because he suddenly stopped pounding on the door. "This isn't over," he hissed through the door. "I'll be back." I heard his footsteps hurrying away, then the sound of the back door slamming. I stayed perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, until I heard car doors slamming outside and voices calling out. "Police, anyone in the house?" I finally found my voice. "In here, in the bathroom," I shouted, my voice breaking. "He just left." The police found me still sitting on the edge of the bathtub, baseball bat in hand, shaking uncontrollably. They searched the entire house and the surrounding property, but found no sign of the man. The power came back on while they were there. Apparently the storm had caused a neighborhood-wide outage. It wasn't something he had done, just terrible timing. They found where he'd broken in, a small window in the laundry room at the back of the house. One of the officers found something outside the back door that made my blood run cold. A large hunting knife, dropped in what must have been his hurry to escape when he heard the sirens. That was 4 months ago. We've since installed a security system, motion detector lights and cameras around the house. My parents don't leave me home alone anymore. I've started seeing a therapist to deal with the anxiety and panic attacks that followed. The police never caught him. They think he was just some drifter passing through, but I'm not convinced. Sometimes I still think I see someone watching the house from across the street, but when I look again, there's no one there. I jump at every unexpected sound now. I check the locks 3 times before going to bed. I sleep with my bedroom door barricaded and keep a baseball bat under my bed. I don't watch horror movies anymore. Real life is scary enough. The thing that haunts me most is what might have happened if my parents hadn't called the police when they did, or what would have happened if I'd believed his story and opened that door. When I think about that knife they found, I used to love being home alone. Now I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe in my own house again. Story 7. I never wanted to share this. For 3 years I've kept it to myself, partly because I don't think anyone would believe me, and partly because I'm still terrified that somehow telling this story might bring it all back. But I can't sleep anymore. I keep seeing that face at my door, those hollow eyes. I need to get this out. My husband Marcus and I moved to Mapleton, this quiet little neighborhood just outside Portland, back in 2018. We'd been apartment hopping for years, saving up for a place of our own where we could finally start a family. The street was exactly what we'd dreamed of. Houses spaced nicely apart, beautiful maple trees lining the sidewalks that turned this amazing deep red in fall. Everyone seemed friendly enough when we moved in. The Harrises next door brought over a casserole. The Thompsons across the street helped Marcus unload our couch. Normal neighborhood stuff. But there was this one house at the very end of the street that just felt wrong. It was this old weathered 2-story with peeling gray paint that might have been white decades ago. The lawn was always overgrown with these patches of dead grass, like nobody had properly cared for it in years. Every single night, without fail, a blue light would come on in one of the upstairs windows around 8 p.m. Not a normal warm bulb, this harsh, cold blue that never flickered or changed intensity. Just stayed on until exactly 2 in the morning, then switched off. I asked Marcus about it once while we were having dinner on our back deck. "Have you noticed that blue light in the house at the end of the street?" He shrugged. "Maybe it's one of those special bulbs for plants or something." But it didn't look like a grow light. It looked, I don't know how to describe it, watchful somehow. After about a week, I finally saw the owner, Mr. Greaves, as I later found out. He was this hunched older man, probably in his 70s, with this wispy white hair that stuck out in patches. He'd shuffle down his driveway to get his mail, always wearing the same dark pants and faded button-up shirt, regardless of the weather. The weird thing was, he never made eye contact with anyone. If neighbors waved, he'd just stare at the ground and hurry back inside. I started noticing other odd things about him and his house. His mailbox was always empty when the mail carrier came by, like he'd already emptied it, but nobody ever saw him do it. His driveway would be completely clear after a snowfall, but nobody ever saw him shoveling. And there was this smell, this acrid metallic odor that would sometimes drift over when the wind blew from his direction. Marcus said it was probably just some old cleaning chemicals or something, but it made my stomach turn. About 2 months after we moved in, I found a bundle on our front porch one morning. It was wrapped in this brittle, yellowed tissue paper and tied with twine. Inside were black and white photographs, 6 of them, showing a family of 4 standing in front of our house. 2 parents, a boy around 10, and a little girl, maybe 6 or 7. They were dressed in these stiff 1950s clothes, the mom in a floral dress, the dad in a suit with his hair slicked back. On the back of one photo, someone had written, "Mapleton, September 1953," in faded blue ink. I showed them to Marcus, and he thought maybe the previous owners had left them behind and someone found them and returned them. But they'd been wrapped so carefully, placed right against our door. That afternoon, I took the photos and walked down the street to Mrs. Langley's house. She was this sweet older lady who'd lived in Mapleton for over 40 years and seemed to know everything about everyone. When I showed her the photos, her hands started shaking. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I explained how I'd found them, and she sat down heavily in her armchair, still holding the photos. "That's the Sullivan family," she said. "They lived in your house back in the 50s. Jack, Martha, and their children, Robert and Emily. What happened to them? I asked. Mrs. Langley's eyes darted toward her window, which faced the street. They disappeared one night, just gone. All their belongings left behind, dinner still on the table. Police investigated for months but never found anything. A chill ran up my spine. And Mr. Greaves, the man at the end of the street. How long has he lived here? She shrugged. Decades. He was here when we moved in. Keeps to himself. Best to do the same with him. When I pressed for more information, she suddenly seemed tired and said she needed to rest. As I was leaving, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Be careful with those photos, she said. Some things are better left in the past. I walked home, glancing down the street toward Greaves's house. For a second, I thought I saw movement behind his curtains, like someone stepping back from the window. And his front door, it was open just a crack, which I'd never seen before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Sullivan family, wondering what had happened to them. Around 1 a.m, I got up to get some water and noticed the blue light was still on in Greaves' house, an hour past when it usually turned off. I stood at our kitchen window, staring at it, when it suddenly went out. A minute later, it came back on, flashed 3 times, and went dark again. The next morning, there was another bundle on our porch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely untie the twine. Inside was a single photograph of me, standing in our living room looking at the Sullivan photos from the night before. The angle was from outside, through our front window, but our blinds had been closed. I'm certain they had been closed. I screamed for Marcus, who called the police immediately. They came and took the photo, asked questions, and sent an officer to Greaves' house. The officer came back looking pale and requested backup. I watched from our porch as more police cars arrived. They were in Greaves' house for hours. When they finally left, one detective stopped by our house. He wouldn't tell us what they'd found, just that they were investigating and we should lock our doors and windows. That night, the blue light didn't come on. For 3 days, there was no sign of Greaves, no movement in the house, no shuffling figure collecting invisible mail. The police came and went carrying boxes and equipment. Neighbors whispered, but nobody seemed to know anything concrete. On the 4th day, a cleaning crew arrived at Greaves's house. When I asked one of the workers what happened, he just shook his head and said, "Lady, I've been doing crime scene cleanup for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this." That night, I woke up at exactly 2 a.m. to a tapping sound at our front door. Tap, tap, tap. Marcus was still asleep beside me. I lay there, frozen, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Perfect rhythm, never speeding up or slowing down. Something compelled me to get up. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. I approached the door and looked through the peephole. I'll never forget what I saw. A face, pale, almost translucent, pressed against the glass. The features were blurry and distorted, but the eyes were hollow, like deep wells of absolute darkness. Behind this figure, standing in a semicircle on our front lawn, were 4 more shapes, taller ones and 2 smaller ones. A family. I stumbled backwards, screaming for Marcus. By the time he got downstairs and we looked outside, there was nothing there. Just our empty front yard and the street beyond, silent and still. But the blue light was back on in Greaves' house. We moved out a month later. I couldn't stay, not with the photographs, the tapping, the face at our door. Not with the way the neighbors suddenly stopped making eye contact with us, the way Mrs. Langley's curtains were always drawn when we walked by. Not with the blue light that now stayed on all night, every night. The police investigation into Greaves concluded with no public statement. The house was sold to a property developer who tore it down. They're building a new home there now. We live in Seattle now, in an apartment building with security and lots of neighbors. But I still wake up at 2 a.m. sometimes, thinking I hear tapping at the door. and I can't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with the entire Mapleton neighborhood, not just Greaves's house. Something underneath it all, something old and patient. Last week, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, our new apartment building, taken from the street. On the back, in faded blue ink, "We miss you. We're coming to visit soon." The blue light in the apartment across the street came on for the first time last night. Story 8. I've been on the Ashford City PD for almost 13 years now, but I'm not sure how much longer I can stay. Not after what happened last month. I haven't told anyone the full story until now, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone here will believe me, or at least help me make sense of what I saw. I work nights, have for the past 5 years. Night shift detective in a city of about 80,000 people. Usually it's just domestic disturbances, drunk drivers, and the occasional breaking and entering. Nothing too crazy. Ashford isn't exactly a crime hotspot. That Tuesday night started like any other. I was at my desk around 11:30, finishing paperwork on a bar fight from earlier, when dispatch called about a missing person report. Normally, missing adults aren't high priority. People have the right to disappear if they want to, but the wife was apparently hysterical, saying something wasn't right. I drove out to their house in the Oak Hills neighborhood. Nice place, 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn. The kind of neighborhood where nothing bad ever happens, at least on the surface. When I pulled up, all the lights were on despite it being after midnight. The wife, Claire Williams, opened the door before I could even knock. She was in her mid-40s, well put, together even at that hour, but her eyes were red and puffy. "Detective, thank you for coming," she said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone who was supposedly hysterical earlier. "Please come in." The house was immaculate inside, too clean almost, like someone had just gone through and sanitized everything. I've been doing this job long enough to recognize when something feels off, and this whole scene felt staged. I sat down with Claire and took her statement. Her husband, Robert, a financial advisor at one of the city's oldest firms, hadn't come home from work. His car was in the garage, his phone was on the kitchen counter, but he was nowhere to be found. "When did you last see him?" I asked, jotting notes in my pad. "This morning, before he left for work." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "But, Detective, Robert's been different lately, distant, staying up late in his office. I thought maybe it was work stress, but now I'm wondering if it was something else." I nodded, trying to read her body language. She was worried, sure, but there was something else there. Fear, but not the kind you'd expect from a concerned spouse. It was deeper, more primal. "Mind if I look around?" I asked. She hesitated just a fraction too long before saying, "Of course." I started in Robert's home office. Everything was neatly organized. Desktop computer, filing cabinet, bookshelf full of financial reference books and golf trophies. Nothing unusual. The browser history on his computer showed normal activity: email, news sites, stock reports. When I checked their bedroom, Claire hovered in the doorway, watching my every move. I noticed her eyes dart repeatedly to the bed. "Something under there I should know about?" I asked casually. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. I knelt down and lifted the dust ruffle. There was a small lockbox pushed against the wall. When I pulled it out and looked up at Claire, her face had gone completely pale. "It's just his personal papers," she said. "Birth certificate, social security card, that sort of thing." The box wasn't locked. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind you might pick up at a specialty bookstore. I flipped it open and immediately felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The pages were filled with bizarre drawings, intricate symbols and diagrams I didn't recognize. They looked almost like the kind of occult symbols you see in horror movies, but more purposeful somehow, more precise. Between the symbols were names written in neat, methodical handwriting, names with dates beside them. I recognized some of those names. Over the past 6 months, Ashford had experienced an unusual number of missing persons cases. Nothing that raised major alarms, A homeless man here, a college student there, a few transients. Cases that are easily explained away or forgotten. But I'd worked several of them, and now I was staring at their names, written in Robert Williams' journal with dates that corresponded exactly to when they'd disappeared. "Mrs. Williams," I said slowly, closing the journal and standing up. "I think you need to tell me what's really going on here." The change in her demeanor was instant and chilling. Her shoulders straightened, her head tilted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice had a different quality to it, harder, more confident. "Detective Carter, you have no idea what you're getting involved in. For your own safety, I suggest you leave that journal where you found it and walk out that door." My hand instinctively moved closer to my service weapon. "How do you know my name? I never introduced myself." The smile she gave me made my blood run cold. "We know everyone in Ashford, especially those in positions of authority." Before I could respond, a loud slam echoed through the house, coming from below us. The basement. "What was that?" I demanded. "Nothing," she said. "Old houses make noises." "This house can't be more than 10 years old," I replied, already moving toward the hallway. "Where's the basement access?" She didn't try to stop me as I found the door and headed down the stairs, which struck me as strange. The basement lights were already on, a finished space with a media room on one side and a storage area on the other. But what caught my attention immediately were the walls. The exposed concrete foundation walls were covered in the same symbols from Robert's journal, drawn in what looked like red paint, but had the distinct metallic smell of blood. They formed patterns, concentric circles, triangles, lines connecting different points, and at the center of the main wall was a large wooden chest, secured with heavy chains and an ornate padlock. As I approached the chest, I swear I heard a voice, not Claire's, not from upstairs, but right next to my ear, whisper, "Don't open it, walk away." I should have listened. God, I should have listened. Instead, I radioed for backup, giving my location and requesting additional units. Only static came back. I tried my cell phone. No signal. I'm not a superstitious person. I deal in facts, evidence, things I can see and touch. But standing in that basement, surrounded by those symbols, I felt something I'd never experienced before, a heaviness in the air, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on me. The rational part of my brain told me this was evidence of some kind of cult activity. Robert was either involved in it or had discovered it. Either way, I needed to see what was in that chest. I found a pair of bolt cutters in the storage area and cut through the chains. The padlock was old and broke easily with a few strikes from a hammer. As I lifted the heavy wooden lid, I prepared myself for the worst. Body parts, torture devices, something horrific. What I found was much more mundane, but somehow more terrifying. Papers. Hundreds of documents, photographs, and maps, meticulously organized in folders. I pulled out the top file and felt my stomach drop. It contained detailed information about every missing person from the journal, including surveillance photos taken before they disappeared. But these weren't random victims. According to the notes, each person had somehow discovered something they shouldn't have about Ashford City. The next folder contained information about city officials, the mayor, council members, judges, the police chief, my boss. Photos of them participating in some kind of ceremony, wearing robes, standing in a circle around an altar. Notes about their contributions and loyalty. Then I found the map, a detailed layout of Ashford showing various locations marked with those same strange symbols. My police precinct was circled in red. This wasn't just some fringe cult. This was organized, systematic, and deeply embedded in Ashford's power structure. I was so absorbed in what I'd discovered that I didn't hear the basement door close and lock. When I finally looked up, Claire was standing at the bottom of the stairs, except she didn't look like the woman I'd interviewed earlier. Her posture was different, rigid, unnatural, and her eyes were completely black, like pools of oil. "You should have left when you had the chance, detective," she said, but the voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, with a strange echo quality that made it sound like multiple people speaking at once. I drew my weapon. "Ma'am, I need you to put your hands up and stay where you are." She laughed, a horrible grating sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your weapon can't harm us, Mason. We've been here long before your great-grandparents ever set foot in this land. We are Ashford." She took a step toward me, moving in a jerky, unnatural way. "Robert thought he could expose us, gather evidence, build a case, but there is no escape from the Covenant. He understood that in the end." "Where is Robert Williams?" I demanded, my gun still trained on her despite my shaking hands. "Robert serves the Covenant now, as all who discover. Our truth must eventually do, as you will." She took another step, and I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but she didn't even flinch. "Last chance," I said. "Stay back." Her head tilted at an impossible angle, and she smiled with too many teeth. "We've been watching you for some time, Mason. So alone since your wife left. No children, few friends. No one would miss you if you simply disappeared." I fired again, this time aiming for her shoulder. A non-lethal shot meant to incapacitate. The bullet hit, but she didn't bleed. She didn't even react. That's when I ran. I sprinted past her toward the stairs, expecting her to grab me, but she just turned slowly, watching as I frantically tried the door. It was locked from the outside. I used my shoulder as a battering ram, throwing myself against the door again and again until the frame splintered and I burst through into the hallway above. The house was silent now, all lights off except for an eerie red glow coming from the kitchen. I made for the front door, but as I passed the kitchen entrance, I saw them, at least 10 figures in dark robes standing in a circle. In the center was a man strapped to a chair, his mouth gagged, eyes wild with terror. Robert Williams. One of the robed figures turned toward me, and even in the dim light, I recognized him, Judge Harmon, who I'd testified before dozens of times. I didn't wait to see more. I crashed through the front door and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as I heard movement from the house. Somehow, I got the engine started and peeled away from the curb, tires screeching. I drove straight to the precinct, still clutching the folder of documents I'd grabbed from the chest. But when I burst into the station, out of breath and wild-eyed, I found the night shift supervisor, Lieutenant Ross, waiting for me. "Carter," he said calmly, "we got a call about you, disturbing the peace at the Williams residence." "Sir, you don't understand. There's something happening in this city, a conspiracy. I have evidence." I held up the folder. He took it from my hands and flipped through it, his expression never changing. "There's nothing here, Carter." I looked down. The folder was empty. That was 4 weeks ago. The official report says I responded to a missing persons call, found nothing suspicious, and suffered some kind of stress-induced episode. Robert Williams returned home safely the next day, a misunderstanding, according to the follow-up. I was put on administrative leave for 2 weeks and ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation. I passed, barely, by telling them what they wanted to hear. Now I'm back on duty, but desk work only. Nobody believes me, but I know what I saw. I know they're watching me. Sometimes I see black eyes staring back at me from ordinary people on the street. Sometimes I hear that voice again, whispering that I should have left it alone. I've started researching Ashford's history in my spare time. The city was founded in 1774 by a group that split from a larger settlement after what historical records vaguely describe as theological differences. There are gaps in the historical record, unexplained disappearances throughout the centuries. I don't know what to do. If I push this, I'll end up like Robert, or worse. If I stay quiet, people will keep disappearing. The symbols from that basement haunt my dreams. I see them everywhere now, hidden in plain sight, in corporate logos, architectural details around the city, even in the layout of our street system when viewed from above. Whatever's controlling Ashford has been here for generations, and now they know that I know. Story 9. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 months since that night at Millstone, and I keep waking up in cold sweats, thinking I hear whispers in my bedroom. My wife says I've been talking, in my sleep, mumbling about the cold and the shadows. She's worried. Hell, I'm worried too. Let me back up. I'm a police officer in Riverton, have been for almost 12 years now. I've seen plenty of crazy stuff in my time. Domestic disputes gone wrong, car wrecks that'll make your stomach turn, even a hostage situation at the local bank a few years back. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Millstone Prison. Millstone shut down about 8 years ago. Budget cuts, they said. The place was ancient anyway, built in the 1930s, all stone walls and narrow corridors with cells barely big enough to lie down in. It sits about 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by nothing but woods and an old access road that's more potholes than pavement these days. Kids sometimes go there on dares, especially around Halloween. Usually, we just chase them off with a warning. But last Friday, we got a different kind of call. A hiker reported seeing lights inside the main building and hearing what sounded like a riot coming from within. Dispatcher said the guy was pretty shaken up. My partner Reyes and I drew the short straw. It was around 8:30 in the evening when we pulled up to the main gate. The prison looked like something out of a horror movie. 3 stories of weathered stone with bars on every window surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Most of the fence was intact, but there were places where it had been cut or pushed down over the years. Bet it's just some teens with a Bluetooth speaker, Reyes said as we grabbed our flashlights. He's always been the rational one. I nodded, but something felt off from the moment we stepped out of the cruiser. The air was different somehow, heavier, like right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear, and it was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no distant highway noise, nothing. We found a gap in the fence and made our way to the main entrance. The massive wooden doors were chained shut, but a side entrance had been pried open. The metal door hung from one hinge, creaking softly in the breeze. "Police! Anyone in here?" I called out as we entered, my voice bouncing off the walls of the reception area. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing peeling paint and decades of grime. Papers were scattered across the floor, left behind when the place was abandoned. No answer, just our echoes and the distant drip of water somewhere deeper in the building. "We should check the common areas first," Reyes suggested. "That's probably where kids would hang out." I agreed, and we started making our way through the admin section toward the center of the prison. Our footsteps echoed on the concrete floors, and our flashlight beams caught dust particles floating in the air. The place smelled musty, like old books and mildew, with an undertone of something else I couldn't quite place. That's when we heard it. Laughter. Not the nervous giggling of teenagers, but deep, throaty laughs coming from multiple voices, and shouting, like men arguing or playing cards. It echoed down the corridor from the direction of the common area. "You hear that?" I whispered. Reyes nodded, his expression serious now. Maybe squatters, or could be one of those urban explorer groups filming something. We picked up our pace, following the sounds. They grew louder as we approached the double doors leading to the common area, a large open space where inmates would gather for meals and recreation. I could make out distinct voices now, at least a dozen of them, talking and laughing. "Police! Everyone stay where you are!" Reyes called out as we pushed through the doors, our flashlights sweeping across the room. Nothing. The common area was completely empty. Just rows of metal tables bolted to the floor, chairs tipped over, and decades of dust undisturbed except for our own footprints, and it was silent again. The voices had stopped the moment we entered. "What the hell?" Reyes muttered, turning in a slow circle. "I swear I heard people in here." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Me too, clear as day. We checked under tables, behind the serving counter, everywhere someone could hide. Nothing, not even footprints in the dust aside from our own. "Let's check the cell blocks," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe the sound carried from there. We headed towards cell block A, the largest section of the prison. The corridor leading there was narrow, with offices on either side. As we passed the warden's office, I glanced inside and stopped dead in my tracks. A man was standing by the desk. He was tall and gaunt, wearing what looked like a faded prison uniform. His skin was pale, almost gray in our flashlight beams, and his eyes, God, his eyes were hollow, like someone had scooped out all the light from them. "Hey," I called out, my hand instinctively moving to my holster. "Sir, this is private property. You need to help me," the man interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow crystal clear. "They killed me for something I didn't do." Reyes stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us now." The man looked at Reyes, then back to me. "They're still here, all of them. The guards who beat us, the warden who turned a blind eye, the doctor who signed off on suicides that weren't suicides." He took a step toward us. "They never left." Before either of us could respond, the temperature in the corridor plummeted. I'm talking about a 20-degree drop in seconds. My breath came out in clouds, and I felt the cold seeping through my uniform. The man's expression changed to one of fear. "They're coming. They know you're here now." And then, I swear to God, he just vanished. One second he was there, the next he wasn't. No sound, no movement, just gone. Reyes and I stood there, stunned. "Did you?" he started to ask. "Yeah," I nodded. "I saw him too." That's when we heard the footsteps, multiple sets coming from all directions, heavy boots on concrete moving fast, and voices again, but different this time. Angry shouts, commands, threats. "Sanders, we need to go," Reyes said, using my last name like he does when things get serious. "Now." We turned back toward the entrance, moving quickly. The footsteps followed us, getting closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept seeing shadows moving along the walls. Tall, broad shadows that didn't match our own. Every time I turned to look directly, there was nothing there, but as soon as I looked away, I could see them in my peripheral vision again. We reached the junction that would take us back to the reception area when all the doors in the corridor slammed shut simultaneously. The crash echoed through the building like a gunshot, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Jesus Christ," Reyes exclaimed. He tried the nearest door. It wouldn't budge, not locked, but like something was holding it shut from the other side. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from the direction of cell block A now, and with them came voices, muttered threats and promises of what they were going to do when they caught us. We ran down the only corridor still open to us, which led deeper into the prison instead of out. The shadows followed, moving faster now, stretching across walls and floor like living things. The air grew colder with each step until it hurt to breathe. "There's a staff exit near the infirmary," Reyes panted as we ran. "Should lead out to the exercise yard." I nodded, too winded to speak. We took a left, then a right, navigating the maze-like corridors. I'd been in Millstone before for criminal transports, but that was years ago, and the place seemed different now, larger, more confusing, corridors that shouldn't be there. We burst through a set of double doors into the infirmary, a long room lined with metal bed frames and ancient medical equipment, and stopped short, standing. Between us and the exit on the far side was a group of figures. Some wore guard uniforms, others looked like medical staff in dingy white coats. Their faces were in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on us. The air around them seemed to waver like heat rising off asphalt in summer, but it was freezing cold. One of them stepped forward, a broad-shouldered man in a guard's uniform. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like gravel. "This is our place now." Behind us, the doors we'd come through slammed shut. The footsteps that had been following us stopped right outside. "We're leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're not here to interfere with whatever this is." The guard figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Too late for that. You heard him, didn't you? Talking about things that are best left buried." The other figures began to move toward us, spreading out to block any escape route. Reyes had his hand on his gun, though I knew as well as he did that it would be useless against whatever these things were. The window, he muttered. To our left was a row of high windows, most with bars, but one had been partially boarded up where the bars had been removed. We backed toward it slowly. The figures continued to advance, taking their time, like they knew we had nowhere to go. When we reached the window, Reyes boosted me up. I kicked away the rotting boards and squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping my sides raw in the process. Then I reached down and helped pull Reyes up. The figures rushed forward as Reyes's legs disappeared through the window. I felt cold hands grasp at my wrists, like being plunged into ice water. I yanked back, falling backward onto the gravel outside. We scrambled to our feet and ran across the exercise yard toward the fence. Behind us, I heard shouts of anger, and when I glanced back, I saw faces pressed against the window we'd escaped through, distorted, furious faces that seemed to shift and change as I watched. We found another gap in the fence and squeezed through, running full tilt toward our cruiser. Only when we were inside with the doors locked and the engine running did I feel like I could breathe again. As we peeled out of the parking lot, I looked back at Millstone. For a split second, I thought I saw figures standing at every window watching us leave. Then we rounded a bend in the road, and the prison disappeared from view. We didn't talk much on the drive back to the station. What was there to say? We filed our report, keeping it vague: suspicious activity, possible trespassers who fled the scene, building secure. Who would believe the truth? But I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I started digging into Millstone's history, old case files, newspaper articles, anything I could find. And what I found made my blood run cold. Dozens of inmate deaths over the years, most ruled as suicides or accidents. A disproportionate number happened during the tenure of Warden Maxwell Hayes in the 1980s and 90s. Inmates who had filed complaints about guard brutality or poor medical care turning up dead weeks later. A prison doctor who signed off on all the death certificates without question. I'm still investigating, piecing together the stories of men who died under suspicious circumstances. Some families have come forward, grateful that someone is finally listening. The department has even authorized a formal review of several cases based on what I've found. And Millstone itself? I've driven by a few times since that night. During the day, it looks like any abandoned building, sad, decaying, but ordinary. But I won't go back inside, not ever. Sometimes at night, I still feel like I'm being watched, like something followed us out of that place. And when I dream, I see that gaunt man's face, asking for help, warning us. I don't know if what we're doing will bring peace to whatever remains at Millstone, but I have to try, because if I don't, I'm afraid those shadows might come looking for me again, and next time I might not make it out. Story 10. I've never told this story publicly before. It's been nearly 6 years and I still wake up in cold sweats when I hear whistling. My therapist says writing it down might help, so here goes. I was a deputy sheriff in Marion County, West Virginia. Small department, rural area. Most nights were drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and the occasional meth lab. Nothing prepares you for the unexplainable. This happened in late October of 2017. I'd been on the force for 8 years by then. My partner, Dave, had only been with us for about 18 months. Young guy, eager, former military, good cop. We got a call around 11:30 at night about a disturbance out near Hollow Ridge. Dispatch was vague. Some hunters reported strange lights and noises near the old Wexler place. Normally, I'd write it off as kids partying in an abandoned building, but Hollow Ridge had a reputation. If you're not from around here, you wouldn't understand. Locals avoid that area. There've been hikers who disappeared over the years. Strange lights in the sky, and that goddamn whistling. People who live in the valley say it comes at night, this eerie, unnatural sound that echoes through the trees. I'd heard stories my whole life, but dismissed them as superstitious nonsense. When we got the call, Dave was excited. "Finally, something interesting," he said. I remember feeling uneasy as we turned onto the dirt road leading to the ridge. It had rained earlier, and our cruiser's headlights cut through a thick mist rising from the ground. The road was barely maintained, more potholes than pavement. It took us almost 40 minutes to reach the area. No cell service, and our radio kept cutting in and out with static. The old Wexler cabin was about a quarter-mile from where the road ended. We had to hike in with just our flashlights. "Did dispatch say exactly what kind of disturbance?" Dave asked as we trudged through the mud. "Just lights and noises," I replied. Probably nothing, but even as I said it, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just our footsteps and breathing. The cabin appeared suddenly through the trees. It was worse than I remembered from my childhood. 2 stories of rotting wood and broken windows. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and the front porch had partially collapsed. According to local history, the Wexlers abandoned it in the 70s after their little boy disappeared in the woods. The county condemned it years ago, but no one ever bothered to demolish it. We approached cautiously, scanning the perimeter with our flashlights. No signs of vehicles or footprints other than our own in the mud. "Hello? Sheriff's Department," Dave called out. His voice seemed swallowed by the darkness. I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. "We should clear the building," I said, unholstering my weapon. Dave nodded and did the same. The front door hung from a single hinge. It creaked horribly as we pushed it open. The smell hit me first, musty and rotten, but with something else underneath. Something sickly sweet that made my stomach turn. Our flashlight beams revealed the interior. It was a disaster. Broken furniture scattered everywhere, floorboards torn up, wallpaper peeling. But what caught my attention were the walls. They were covered with symbols, hundreds of them carved directly into the wood, circles within circles, strange angular figures, lines connecting in patterns that hurt my eyes to follow. "What the hell is this?" Dave whispered. "Satanic stuff?" I shook my head. "I don't know." The symbols didn't look like anything I'd ever seen in devil worship cases. They were more mathematical somehow, precise. We moved through the first floor methodically. Kitchen, living room, what might have been a study, all in similar states of decay, all with those symbols carved everywhere. No signs of recent occupation though, no food wrappers, no beer cans, nothing to suggest teenagers partying. Then we heard it, a rhythmic tapping from upstairs. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. Dave and I exchanged glances. He pointed upward and mouthed, "Someone's up there." We approached the staircase carefully. Several steps were missing, and the ones that remained looked ready to collapse. "Police! Anyone up there?" I called out. The tapping stopped immediately. I took the lead, testing each step with my foot before putting my weight on it. The wood groaned in protest. Halfway up, I heard Dave's sharp intake of breath behind me. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" I thought I heard someone say my name. I paused, listening. Nothing but the creak of the old house. "Just the wind," I said, but I didn't believe it. There was no wind that night. We reached the second floor. It was a long hallway with 3 doors, 2 on the left, 1 at the end, all closed. The tapping started again, coming from the room at the end. The floorboards felt spongy underfoot as we moved down the hallway. I gestured for Dave to check the first room while I covered him. He pushed the door open slowly, revealing what had once been a bathroom. The porcelain fixtures were black with mold, and the floor had partially collapsed into the room below. The second room was similarly decrepit, an empty bedroom with a rusted metal bed frame. More symbols covered the walls here, and someone had arranged small animal bones in patterns on the floor. The tapping continued from the room at the end of the hall. It was faster now, more urgent. "Sheriff's Department, come out with your hands up," I called, positioning myself beside the door with my weapon ready. No response, just that steady tapping. Dave took position on the other side. I nodded, and he turned the knob, pushing the door open with his foot. My flashlight beams swept the room. It was larger than the others, probably the master bedroom. A broken 4-poster bed frame occupied one corner. Tattered curtains hung from the windows, and in the center of the room was an old wooden rocking chair, moving back and forth on its own, tap, tap, tap. As it rocked, the chair legs hit the floor. There was nobody in it, nobody in the room at all. "What the fuck?" Dave breathed. As if in response, the rocking accelerated, the chair creaking horribly. "It's just air currents," I said, though we both knew there was no draft. Then we heard the moaning, a low guttural sound that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. It rose in pitch until it became a wail that made the hair on my neck stand up. "We need to get out of here," Dave said, backing toward the door. I didn't argue. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something two deputies with handguns were equipped to handle. We turned to leave, and that's when our radios crackled to life simultaneously. Through the static came a voice, distorted, barely understandable, but unmistakably saying, "Get out." We didn't need to be told twice. We hurried down the hallway, taking the stairs two at a time despite the danger. Behind us, doors began slamming open and closed on their own. We reached the first floor and sprinted for the exit. But just as we approached it, the front door slammed shut with such force that the whole cabin shook. Dave reached it first, pulling at the handle. "It won't open," he shouted, panic evident in his voice. I threw my shoulder against it. Nothing. It was like hitting solid steel. The temperature dropped suddenly, so cold I could see my breath. The moaning sound returned, coming from everywhere at once, and then the whistling started. It's hard to describe. It wasn't like human whistling. It moved around the room, rising and falling in pitches that shouldn't be possible. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from inches, from my ear, then would suddenly be across the room. Dave emptied his magazine into the door lock. The bullets ricocheted dangerously, but the door remained firmly shut. "The windows!" I shouted. We ran to the nearest one. I used my flashlight to break the glass, then cleared the frame of shards. We climbed through one after another, cutting ourselves on the remaining glass, but too terrified to care. Outside, the night had changed. The mist had thickened into a heavy fog that limited visibility to a few feet. The whistling followed us, seeming to come from every direction at once. "The car!" Dave gasped, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "Which way?" I pointed in the direction we'd come from, and we started running. The ground felt wrong under my feet, softer than it should be, uneven. The trees looked different too, taller and more twisted. We ran for what felt like 10 minutes before stopping to catch our breath. The cabin should have been far behind us, but when I turned to look back, I could still see its silhouette through the fog, exactly as far away as when we'd exited. "That's impossible," Dave whispered. We kept moving, faster now. The whistling grew more insistent, more erratic. After another 15 minutes of running, we stopped again. Our cruiser should have been right in front of us. It wasn't. Instead, impossibly, the cabin loomed ahead of us again. "We must have gotten turned around," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Dave shook his head. We were going straight the whole time. I took out my compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling. We tried again, moving in a different direction. The same thing happened. No matter which way we went, no matter how far we walked, we couldn't find the road or our cruiser. And always, the cabin would appear before us, as if the forest was looping back on itself. The whistling changed, becoming more urgent, almost like it was trying to communicate. Sometimes it sounded like words just on the edge of comprehension. We wandered for hours. My watch had stopped at 11:58, but I knew it had to be well past midnight. The fog never lifted, and the cabin kept reappearing no matter which direction we took. Dave was the first to break. "It wants us to go back in," he said, staring at the cabin that had appeared yet again before us. "That's insane," I replied. "Nothing about this is sane, James," he shouted. "We've been walking for hours. This isn't possible." The whistling grew louder, more frantic. Dave started walking toward the cabin. "What are you doing?" I grabbed his arm. "Following the whistling," he said, his eyes unfocused. "It's showing us the way out." I had to physically restrain him. We struggled, and I accidentally knocked him down. He hit his head on a rock, not hard, but enough to daze him. While he was down, I noticed something. The whistling had changed direction. It was coming from behind us now, not from the cabin. "Come on," I said, helping Dave up. "This way." We followed the whistling, moving away from the cabin. The fog seemed to thin slightly. The ground felt more solid. After about 20 minutes, the trees thinned, and suddenly we were standing on asphalt, the main road. I've never felt such relief in my life. Dave was shaking uncontrollably, and I wasn't much better. We walked along the road for another half hour before a truck driver spotted us and gave us a ride to the nearest gas station. From there, we called the station. The search party found our cruiser right where we'd left it, at the end of the dirt road. According to them, the old Wexler cabin wasn't there anymore, just a clearing with the remains of a foundation that had been abandoned decades ago. Dave quit the force 3 months later, moved to Ohio. We don't talk anymore. I stayed on, but I've never gone back to Hollow Ridge. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I still hear that whistling, just at the edge of hearing, like it followed me home. I don't know what happened that night. I can't explain it, and I've stopped trying. All I know is there are places in those woods where reality thins, where things that shouldn't exist find their way through, and they're still there, whistling in the dark. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I still get nightmares, still wake up in cold sweats, still can't walk into any big retail store without feeling my chest tighten. What happened during my night shift at Walmart last October wasn't just scary, it was impossible. But it happened. I know it happened. I was a sophomore at Eastern Illinois University, struggling to balance classes with my part-time evening shifts at the Walmart Supercenter about 15 minutes from campus. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover groceries and gas money, and the late-night shifts worked around my class schedule. I'd been there about 3 months when things got weird. It started with little comments from the other night crew, jokes about aisle 12 that I didn't understand. "Don't get stuck restocking aisle 12 after midnight," they'd say. Or, "Did you hear anything in 12 last night?" I figured it was just the usual workplace folklore that develops when people work late hours together. Every job has that one creepy spot everyone jokes about. Until Derek, who'd been there 5 years, pulled me aside after a shift. He wasn't smiling when he said, "Seriously though, try to finish aisle 12 before 11 if you can. Just trust me on this." When I pressed him for details, he just shook his head and said something about bad energy in that section. I laughed it off as superstition, but on October 27th, I stopped laughing. My shift started at 4 in the afternoon, just as the sun was starting to set. It was one of those perfect fall evenings, crisp air, orange and red leaves everywhere. I remember thinking, how much I'd rather be at the campus Halloween party that weekend instead of restocking shelves all night. I was assigned to housewares that evening, which included the infamous aisle 12, cleaning supplies, air fresheners, and laundry detergent. Around 8:30, a middle-aged woman approached me while I was organizing some items on an end cap display. She looked off. Her eyes were darting around nervously, and she kept fidgeting with her wedding ring. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you tell me where I can find bleach?" I smiled and pointed down the main walkway. "Aisle 12, about halfway down on the right." Her face went pale. "Aisle 12? Are you sure?" "Yeah, all the cleaning supplies are there. Do you need help finding it?" She shook her head quickly. No, I'll go, thank you." Then she hesitated and asked, "Is there anyone else working down there?" "No, ma'am, just me in this section tonight." She nodded slowly and walked away, looking back over her shoulder twice. I didn't think much of it at the time. We get all sorts of people at Walmart, especially the late evening crowd. About 20 minutes later, I realized I hadn't seen the woman come back out of the aisle. I needed to restock the paper towels anyway, so I grabbed my cart and headed toward aisle 12. The moment I turned into that aisle, I felt it. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees. I'm not exaggerating. It was like walking into a refrigerator. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer here, though they weren't flickering or anything obvious. Just subdued. And there was a smell. Not overwhelming, but definitely noticeable, like metal left out in the rain with something rotting underneath. "Hello?" I called out. "Ma'am, did you find what you needed?" No answer. I pushed my cart further down the aisle, scanning for the woman. The store wasn't that busy, but I could hear the normal sounds of shoppers and announcements over the PA system. They just seemed farther away than they should have been. Then I heard it, a tapping sound, rhythmic, like fingernails on a hard surface. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. I froze, my hands gripping the cart handle so tight my knuckles turned white. The tapping was coming from the far end of the aisle, where the shadows seemed deeper than they should have been under normal lighting. "Is someone there?" My voice came out shakier than I intended. The tapping stopped. I should have left. Every instinct was screaming at me to back out of that aisle and find a manager. But I kept thinking about the nervous woman. What if she'd fallen or something? I couldn't just leave if someone needed help, so I pushed my cart forward, moving slowly toward the end of the aisle. Each step felt heavier than the last, like walking through mud. The smell got stronger, metallic and rotten. When I was about 3/4 of the way down, I saw it. Standing at the very end of the aisle was a figure. Not the woman I'd been looking for. Not anyone who should exist outside of a nightmare. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and impossibly thin. Its skin was a grayish white and looked stretched too tight over its bones, like plastic wrap over a skeleton. But the worst part was its face. It had a mouth that stretched into a grin that was literally ear to ear, filled with teeth that looked too numerous and too sharp to be human. And its eyes, God, its eyes were a sickly yellow color that seemed to glow from within like jaundiced flashlights. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me, that awful grin fixed on its face. I couldn't even tell if it was breathing. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Then it tilted its head to the side at an angle that would have broken a human neck, and the tapping started again. But I could now see it wasn't using its fingers. The sound was coming from its teeth, clicking together in that same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. I abandoned my cart and ran. I didn't scream. I couldn't get enough air in my lungs to make a sound. I just bolted, nearly colliding with a customer as I rounded the corner. I didn't stop until I reached the employee break room, where I collapsed into a chair, gasping for breath. Mike, one of the other night stalkers, was on his lunch break. He looked up from his phone, concerned. "Whoa, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words came out jumbled and frantic. Mike's expression shifted from concern to amusement. "Aisle 12, huh?" He chuckled. "Derek's been filling your head with that nonsense too? Look, the only thing scary in aisle 12 is how often we have to clean up spilled bleach." "But I saw something," I insisted. "It wasn't human." Mike sighed and put down his phone. "Listen, I've worked here 3 years. The old-timers love to freak out the new people with stories about aisle 12. It's just a thing they do. Whatever you think you saw, it was probably just your imagination playing tricks after hearing all their ghost stories." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe I'd just scared myself into seeing something that wasn't there. But I couldn't shake the memory of those yellow eyes, that impossible grin. Mike must have seen the doubt on my face because he stood up and grabbed his vest. "Come on, I'll go check it out with you. We'll have a good laugh about this." The break room clock read 11:45 p.m. I really didn't want to go back out there, but having Mike with me made it seem less terrifying. We walked through the store, which was nearly empty now, just a few late-night shoppers finishing up. As we approached housewares, Mike kept up a running commentary about how the ventilation system sometimes creates cold spots and how the lighting in certain aisles can play tricks on your eyes. It all sounded so reasonable, so normal, until the lights flickered, just once, all throughout the store. A quick dimming and brightening that made both of us stop in our tracks. "Probably just a power surge," Mike said. but he didn't sound convinced anymore. We reached the entrance to aisle 12. My cart was still there, abandoned halfway down, but there was no sign of any tall, grinning figure. "See? Nothing here," Mike said, stepping into the aisle. I stayed at the entrance, unwilling to go back in. "Can we just go? Please?" I begged. Mike rolled his eyes. "Fine, let me just grab your cart so you don't get in trouble for abandoning it." He walked down the aisle, grabbed the handle of my cart, and then stopped. He bent down to look at something on the floor. "Hey!" he called back to me. "Was this here before?" I couldn't see what he was looking at. "What is it?" "Looks like someone spilled something. I don't know. It's weird. Come look." "No way, just leave it, please." He shrugged and started pushing my cart back toward me. That's when the lights flickered again, longer this time. When they came back on, Mike and the cart were gone. Not like he'd walked away, like he'd simply vanished in the second of darkness. "Mike," I called out. "Mike, this isn't funny." No answer, just that tapping sound again, coming from deep within the aisle. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away, then turned and ran toward the front of the store. I needed to find a manager, security, anyone. The store was closing in 10 minutes. There had to be someone who could help. When I reached the front, I found Mike's cart abandoned near the self-checkouts. His vest was draped over the handle, but there was no sign of Mike. "Hello," I called out. "Is anyone here?" The store seemed deserted now. No customers, no employees at the registers. Just the low hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional automated announcement that the store would be closing soon. I pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal, not even one bar. I tried moving around, holding it up higher, but nothing helped. That's when I heard the tapping again, closer now, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around and saw nothing, but I knew where I needed to go. Something was pulling me back toward aisle 12, like a magnet. Not because I wanted to go there, God knows I didn't, but because somehow I knew that's where I'd find answers. The store lights dimmed again as I approached housewares. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor. When I reached aisle 12, I saw something on the floor that made my blood run cold. Clothes, shredded clothes that looked like what Mike had been wearing, and dark stains on the floor that I didn't want to examine too closely. I should have run. I should have broken a window, pulled a fire alarm, anything to get out or get help. Instead, I took a step into the aisle. "What do you want?" I whispered. The tapping stopped. Then, from the shadows at the end of the aisle, it emerged. The same gaunt figure with that terrible grin. But this time, it wasn't standing still. It was moving toward me, its body jerking in unnatural ways, like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. I turned to run and realized my mistake immediately. I should have stayed by the main aisle where there were multiple escape routes. Now I had to get past it to escape. I ran anyway, sprinting toward the front of the store. The emergency exits would trigger an alarm, but at that point I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I reached the front doors and pushed against them. They didn't budge. I remembered then, the automatic locks engaged at midnight. The doors wouldn't open without a manager's key. The tapping was getting closer. I looked back and saw it moving down the main aisle toward me, still with that jerky, wrong movement. Its yellow eyes fixed on me, unblinking. In desperation, I ran to the back of the store. There had to be an employee exit, a loading dock, something. I found myself in the stockroom, surrounded by pallets of merchandise and rolling shelves. I squeezed into a gap between some large boxes, making myself as small as possible. For what felt like hours, I sat there, barely breathing, listening for any sound of pursuit. Occasionally, I'd hear the tapping, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, like it was searching for me. Then, around what must have been 3 or 4 in the morning, I heard the stockroom door open. The tapping was loud and clear now. It was in the room with me. I pressed myself further back into my hiding place, praying it wouldn't find me. The tapping moved methodically through the room, pausing occasionally as if it were sniffing me out. Then the boxes beside me shifted. One by one, they were being moved aside. I closed my eyes, unable to look at what I knew was about to find me. When the last box was moved, I felt cold air on my face. I opened my eyes and found myself staring directly into those sickly yellow ones, not 3 feet from my face. That grin widened impossibly further, and I saw now that what I had taken for teeth were more like jagged shards of bone. It reached out one long skeletal hand toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. This was it. I was going to die here, just like Mike. But then, inexplicably, it pulled back. It tilted its head again at that impossible angle, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then it turned and left, leaving the stockroom door open behind it. I don't know why it spared me. Maybe it wasn't hungry anymore after Mike. Maybe it was just playing with me. Whatever the reason, I didn't waste the opportunity. I waited 5 minutes to make sure it wasn't a trick, then bolted from my hiding place. I ran through the store, expecting at any moment to feel those bony hands grab me from behind. When I reached the front doors, they were unlocked. The sun was just starting to rise, and the morning crew was arriving for their shifts. I pushed past them and ran to my car, ignoring their confused calls. I never went back. I called later that day and quit over the phone. When they asked about Mike, I just said I hadn't seen him since our break. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what really happened. Who would believe me? The police investigated Mike's disappearance, but they never found anything. No blood, no signs of struggle. They interviewed me, of course, but what could I say? That a monster took him? They'd have locked me up. It's been almost a year now, and I still don't know what that thing was or why it was in aisle 12 of a Walmart in Illinois. I don't know why it took Mike and not me. All I know is that I can't go into big stores anymore, especially at night. And whenever I smell that metallic rotting scent or hear anything that sounds remotely like tapping, I run. I'm writing this as a warning. There are things out there that shouldn't exist, things that defy explanation. And sometimes they're lurking in the most ordinary places, waiting for someone curious or unlucky enough to find them. If you're working retail and your co-workers warn you about a specific area, listen to them. I wish I had. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night 3 weeks ago. I've been working up the courage to share this because I need to tell someone who might understand or maybe even have experienced something similar. I work at Ginny's Diner in Maplewood, just your typical small-town greasy spoon where everyone knows everyone. That particular Friday, I'd pulled a double shift because Tanya called in sick again. So by 11 p.m., I was beyond exhausted. My feet were killing me. I smelled like French fries, and all I wanted was to get home, shower, and collapse into bed. Usually, I take the main road home. It's longer but well lit and passes through town. That night, though, I was so tired I decided to take the shortcut through Blackwood Forest. Everyone in Maplewood knows about that road. Growing up, we'd all heard the stories about the lady in white, who supposedly died in a car crash there in the 70s and now appears to drivers at night. I always rolled my eyes at that stuff. I mean, I've driven that road dozens of times during daylight, and it's just a road, nothing special. So I got in my beat-up Ford Focus, the blue one I've had since college with the dent in the passenger door from when my ex backed into a pole, and headed out. It was around 11:30 by then, and there wasn't another car in sight. The diner's parking lot was empty, except for my car and Jake's, the cook, motorcycle. The entrance to the forest road is just past the Welcome to Maplewood sign, and as soon as I turned onto it, I immediately regretted my decision. It was darker than I remembered, like unnaturally dark. The trees on either side of the narrow 2-lane road seemed to bend inward, creating this tunnel effect that made me feel claustrophobic. My headlights barely cut through the darkness ahead, and the moonlight couldn't penetrate the thick canopy above. I turned up the radio to distract myself. It was playing some late-night call-in show, but about 2 miles in, it started to static. I fiddled with the tuner, but every station was the same, just static with occasional fragments of voices cutting through. I finally gave up and turned it off. which was when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. They appeared out of nowhere, bright, high beams that lit up my entire car. At first, I was relieved. Another person meant I wasn't alone on this creepy road. But then I realized how fast they were approaching, like dangerously fast, and they were massive headlights, set high up like on a truck or SUV. My heart started racing when I realized they weren't slowing down. They got so close I couldn't see anything in my mirror except those blinding lights. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, pushing my poor focus to 70, on a road that should be taken at 40, tops. The SUV stayed right on my tail, so close that if I'd tapped my brakes, they would have slammed into me. I was starting to panic, my hands getting sweaty on the steering wheel. I remembered there was a turnoff coming up, a narrow gravel road that led to the old Wilson property, and at the last second, I yanked the wheel and took the turn. My tires skidded on the loose gravel, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd flip over. Somehow I managed to straighten out and keep going. The SUV's brakes screeched as it overshot the turn. I had a moment's relief, thinking I'd lost them, but then I heard the engine rev and saw the headlights swing around. They were coming after me. That's when I caught a glimpse of the driver, just for a split second as my rearview mirror caught them in the turn. It wasn't clear, just a dark silhouette, but something about it felt wrong. The shape didn't look normal, like the head was too large or misshapen. I can't explain it, but seeing that made my blood run cold. The gravel road was barely wide enough for my car and full of potholes. I was going too fast, and my car was bouncing so hard I bit my tongue. The taste of blood filled my mouth as I desperately tried to put distance between us. Then, suddenly, the headlights behind me vanished. Not like they turned off, but like they just disappeared. I kept driving for another minute or so, my heart pounding in my chest, before I finally allowed myself to slow down. Had I imagined it? Was I so tired that I'd panicked over nothing? I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I needed to catch my breath and figure out where I was. That's when I saw her. About 20 feet ahead, standing at the edge of my headlight's reach, was a woman. She was just standing there, in the middle of nowhere, on a deserted gravel road at almost midnight. My first thought was that this was someone from one of the farms nearby who heard my car speeding down the road and came to check. But as I looked closer, I realized she wasn't dressed for the chilly October weather. She had on what looked like a thin dress, torn at the hem. Her hair was a mess, long and tangled like she'd been running through the woods. And she was just staring at my car, not moving. Part of me wanted to just drive away. Every horror movie I've ever seen was screaming in my head to get the hell out of there. But I couldn't just leave someone stranded in the middle of the forest, especially with that creepy SUV somewhere around. I rolled down my window just a crack. "Are you okay?" I called out. She took a step toward my car and then another. As she got closer, I could see she was young, maybe around my age, 25 or so. Her face was pale in my headlights, and there was a wild, frightened look in her eyes. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Please help me. They're coming for me." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's coming for you?" She glanced nervously over her shoulder into the darkness. "Them. They found me again. I can't go back." Before I could ask anything else, I heard it, the rumble of an engine in the distance. The woman's head snapped around, and the look of pure terror on her face made my decision for me. "Get in," I said, reaching over to unlock the passenger door. She ran to the car and practically dove into the seat. Up close, I could see her dress wasn't just torn. It was stained with something dark that I desperately hoped wasn't blood. Her hands were scratched and dirty, like she'd been crawling through the underbrush. "What's your name?" I asked as I put the car in drive and started moving. "Lily," she said, constantly looking out the back window. "My name's Lily. Thank you for stopping. I didn't think anyone would come down this road tonight." I wanted to ask a million questions. Who was after her? Why? How she ended up in the woods? But the headlights appeared in my rearview mirror again, and all I could think about was getting us both to safety. "Hold on," I warned Lily as I floored it. The Focus lurched forward, engine whining in protest as we bounced down the gravel road. I had no idea where it led, but I was hoping it would connect back to the main road eventually. "They won't stop," Lily said, her voice eerily calm despite her obvious fear. "They never stop." "Who are they?" I demanded, taking a curve too fast and feeling the back end of my car slide a bit. "What do they want?" Lily just shook her head. "I've been running for so long." The SUV was gaining on us, its massive front grille now visible in my mirror. The gravel road suddenly opened up onto the main forest road, thank God, and I took the turn so hard we both lurched to the side. Lily grabbed the dashboard to steady herself, and I noticed something strange, a small tattoo on her wrist, shaped like a key. "The gas station," I said, trying to think clearly. "There's a gas station about 3 miles up this road. There'll be people there." Lily nodded, her eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. The SUV was still behind us, but I had a faster car and the advantage of knowing these roads. I pushed my Focus harder than I ever had before, the speedometer climbing past 80, then 90. The trees whipped by in a blur of darkness. Finally, the lights of the gas station appeared ahead, the 24/7 pump and go that caters to truckers. I'd never been so happy to see that dingy little place in my life. I screeched into the parking lot and pulled up right in front of the door. Through the windows, I could see the night attendant, old Bill, who'd worked there since I was a kid, look up in surprise. "Come on," I said to Lily, throwing my car door open. "We need to get inside." We ran for the door just as the SUV pulled into the lot behind us. For the first time, I got a good look at it, a black Escalade with tinted windows and no license plate. The driver's door opened as we reached the gas station entrance. The fluorescent lights inside the store felt blindingly bright after the darkness of the forest. Bill stood behind the counter, looking confused and slightly alarmed at our sudden entrance. "Emma, what's going on?" he asked, recognizing me from my many coffee stops on the way to early shifts. Before I could answer, the gas station door slammed open again. A man stormed in, tall, dressed all in black, with the kind of face you'd expect to see on a mugshot. The kind of face that's handsome but in a cruel way. His eyes locked onto Lily, who shrank behind me. "There you are," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "You've caused a lot of trouble tonight." "Get out of my store," Bill said, reaching for the phone. "I'm calling the cops." The man's eyes flicked to Bill, then to me. "This doesn't concern you. Just give her to me and we'll be on our way." "I'm not going back," Lily said, her voice stronger than I expected. "You can tell him I'm done." The man took a step forward, and I could see something in his hand. Not a gun, but something that glinted metallically under the lights. "You know that's not how this works, Lily. You don't get to be done. Now come here before I have to make a scene." That's when we heard it, sirens in the distance, getting closer. Someone must have reported our cars speeding through town. The man's face hardened, and he pointed at Lily. "This isn't over," he said. "You know he'll find you. He always does." Then he looked at me, and the coldness in his eyes made me feel like I'd been doused in ice water. "And you should be more careful about who you pick up on the road." Then he was gone, back out to the Escalade. The tires squealed as he pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the road in the opposite direction from the approaching sirens. 2 police cars pulled up less than a minute later. I recognized Officer Harding as he walked in. He'd been a few years ahead of me in school. "Emma?" he said, looking between me and Lily. "What's going on?" "We got reports of cars racing through town." It took almost an hour to explain everything to the police. Lily told them she'd been out for a walk when the SUV started following her, forcing her to run into the woods to escape. She was vague about who the man was, just saying he'd been stalking her for weeks. The police took our statements and said they'd look for the Escalade, but without a license plate, they didn't seem hopeful. Officer Harding insisted on following me home to make sure I got there safely. Lily went with another officer to the station to file a formal report. As I was leaving, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you," in my ear. I never saw her again after that night. It's been 3 weeks, and I still can't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story that Lily wasn't telling. Who was she running from? What did that man mean when he said he'll find you? And that tattoo on her wrist, I keep thinking about it. I don't take the forest road anymore. I stick to the main roads, even if it means an extra 20 minutes to get home. I've started looking over my shoulder constantly, checking my rearview mirror for headlights that get too close. Every time I see a black SUV, my heart rate spikes. The police never found the Escalade. They told me to call if I see it again, but somehow I know I won't. Whatever was happening that night feels like it's part of something bigger, something darker that I only glimpsed the edge of. I still don't believe in ghosts or the lady in white, but I do believe there are things in this world that are more frightening than any ghost story. Real people with real darkness in them, and sometimes they find you on lonely roads in the middle of the night. Story 13. I've been an officer with the Elmwood PD for 12 years now. You see a lot of weird stuff working nights in a small town. Drunk teenagers, domestic disputes, the occasional break-in, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened last month at the old Anderson place on Maple Street. I guess I should start by saying I've never believed in ghosts. I'm a practical guy. I believe in evidence, facts, things I can see and touch. At least that's how I used to think. It was around 11:30 on a Tuesday night in October. The shift had been quiet, just a noise complaint and a fender bender downtown. I was doing my usual patrol route when the call came in, possible break-in at 1478 Maple. I recognized the address immediately. Everyone in Elmwood knows the Anderson house. It's that creepy Victorian that's been sitting empty since the 70s, all boarded up windows and overgrown yard. The place where that family died. When I pulled up, everything looked normal. Well, as normal as that decaying mansion ever looks. No broken windows, no sign of forced entry. The chain link fence the city put up years ago was intact. I radioed in that I was going to check it out, and my partner Garrett said he'd be there in 10 minutes for backup. I should have waited for him. Jesus Christ, I should have waited. Using my flashlight, I checked the perimeter first. Nothing seemed disturbed. The front door was locked, but I noticed the basement window had been pried open, just enough for someone small to squeeze through. Probably kids on a dare, I figured. It wouldn't be the first time. I radioed in what I'd found and decided to check inside. I managed to force the front door. It was old, and the wood around the lock was rotted. The smell hit me immediately. That musty, damp smell of a house that's been closed up for decades. Dust everywhere, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and water-stained floors. "Police, anyone here?" My voice echoed through the empty rooms. No response. As I stepped into the foyer, I felt it, like a cold finger tracing down my spine. I turned quickly, thinking someone was behind me, but there was nothing. Just the open door and the night outside. I shrugged it off as a draft, but my heart was suddenly racing. I moved through the first floor methodically, checking each room. The place was a time capsule, furniture covered in sheets, old photographs on the walls, even dishes in the kitchen cabinets. Like the family had just stepped out and never returned, which I guess they hadn't. I was about to head back outside to wait for Garrett when I heard it. A definite footstep from upstairs. Heavy, like a boot on old floorboards. Then another. "Police officer, come down with your hands where I can see them." I called up the stairs, my hand on my holster. Silence. I radioed Garrett. "Got movement on the second floor. How far out are you?" 3 minutes, he responded. "I'm going up," I told him, though every instinct was screaming at me not to. The staircase creaked under my weight. At the top was a long hallway with 5 doors, all closed except one at the far end, which was slightly ajar. As I reached the landing, I heard the footsteps again, and what sounded like a woman crying. "Ma'am, police officer, are you okay?" I called out. The crying stopped abruptly. Then the door at the end of the hall slowly swung closed with a creak that made my skin crawl. I moved down the hallway, checking each room as I went. Empty, empty, empty. When I reached the last door, the one that had just closed, I found it locked. "I need you to open this door now," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing, but I could feel something on the other side, a presence. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way I can describe it. Like when you know someone's watching you. I tried the knob again, rattling it hard. Suddenly it turned under my hand, and the door swung inward so quickly I nearly fell forward. The room was freezing. I could see my breath in front of my face. It was empty except for a rocking chair in the center of the room, facing away from me toward the window, and the chair was moving, rocking slowly back and forth on the warped wooden floor. There was no one in it. I stood frozen in the doorway, my flashlight beam fixed on that empty rocking chair. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Thompson, I'm out front," Garrett's voice came through. "Where are you?" I raised the radio to respond, but before I could speak, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, grabbing for the knob, but it wouldn't turn. I was locked in. "Garrett," I yelled into the radio. "Second floor, end of the hall. The door's jammed." The temperature seemed to drop even further. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. The rocking chair stopped abruptly. That's when I felt it. Someone was in the room with me. I turned slowly, my flashlight scanning the empty space. And then I saw her. She was standing in the corner that had been empty just seconds before. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, something from the 20s maybe. Her skin was so pale it seemed to glow slightly in the darkness, and her eyes, God, her eyes were just black hollows in her face. Her mouth was open in what looked like a silent scream. I won't lie, I panicked. I backed up against the door, my hand fumbling for my gun, though what good I thought that would do against whatever this was, I don't know. She raised one arm slowly, pointing to something in the opposite corner. My flashlight beam followed her gesture to reveal a small, ragged doll lying on the floor. It looked ancient, with button eyes and yarn hair. Then she spoke. Her lips didn't move, but I heard the words clearly, like they were being whispered directly into my ear. "Please, help me." I heard Garrett pounding on the door behind me, calling my name. But I couldn't look away from her. She took a step toward me, then another. The air around her seemed to ripple, like heat off pavement in summer. "Mike, stand back from the door," Garrett shouted. The woman was just feet away now. Up close, I could see that her dress was charred at the edges, and there were what looked like burn marks on her arms and neck. The door burst open as Garrett kicked it in, and I practically fell backward into the hallway. When I looked up, the room was empty. No woman, no rocking chair, nothing but dust and cobwebs. "Jesus, Thompson, you're white as a sheet," Garrett said, helping me up. "What happened?" I couldn't explain. How could I tell my partner I'd seen a ghost? I mumbled something about getting dizzy, maybe from the dust or old mold in the air. We did a thorough search of the house but found nothing. No intruders, no sign anyone had been there in years. It wasn't until we were back at the station that I learned who I'd seen. The desk sergeant, Bill Murphy, he's been with the department forever, recognized my description immediately. "Sounds like you met Lila Anderson," he said, his face serious. "She disappeared during the house fire in '68. They found her husband and 2 kids, but never found her body. I couldn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept seeing those hollow eyes, hearing that whispered plea for help. I started researching the Anderson family, the house, the fire. I couldn't let it go. A week later, I went back. I know, stupid, right? But I had to. I brought along a couple of paranormal investigators I'd found online. I figured if I was losing my mind, at least I'd have witnesses. The moment we stepped into that house, the equipment they brought went crazy. Temperature drops, EMF spikes, static on their recorders. And in that same upstairs bedroom, we all heard it. A woman's voice, begging us to find the truth. I became obsessed. I took time off work, spent days in the local archives, tracked down neighbors who'd lived on Maple Street in the '60s. I interviewed the firefighters who'd responded to the blaze, now retired old men with shaking hands but sharp memories. The story that emerged was disturbing. Charles Anderson hadn't been the upstanding businessman everyone thought. He'd been involved in loan sharking, illegal gambling, maybe worse. There were rumors about missing people, about bodies buried on the property. And the fire that killed him and his children? It hadn't been an accident. The fire inspector had suspected arson but could never prove it. Charles had enemies, people he'd ruined financially, people who owed him money they couldn't repay. And Lila? There were whispers that she'd been planning to go to the police, that she knew things that could have put her husband away for life. Last week, I went back to the Anderson house one final time, alone. I know. After everything that happened, it sounds insane, but I had to tell her what I'd found. The house felt different this time, quieter somehow. When I reached that upstairs bedroom, the door was already open, waiting for me. "Lila," I said into the empty room, feeling like a complete idiot but pushing on anyway. "I know what happened. Your husband was killed because of his criminal activities. The fire was set to silence you both. I found old police reports, witness statements. People knew, but they were too afraid to come forward. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I felt it, a warmth surrounding me, completely different from the cold presence I'd felt before. It was like standing in a shaft of sunlight on a winter day. I didn't see her this time, but I heard her, a soft thank you that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then the warmth faded, and I knew she was gone. I've requested a proper investigation into the Anderson case. There's evidence of multiple crimes that were never pursued. Maybe some justice can still be done, even after all these years. I still can't explain what happened in that house. I'm not sure I want to, but I know what I experienced was real. And sometimes at night, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I can still hear that whispered plea, "Please help me." Whatever was keeping Lila Anderson trapped in that house, I hope she's free now. I hope she's at peace. But I still keep my lights on at night. And I still can't drive down Maple Street without feeling those hollow eyes watching me from the upstairs window of the Anderson house. Story 14. I still can't sleep properly after what happened at the Holloway Hotel 3 weeks ago. I've been staying at my sister's place because being alone in my apartment feels impossible right now. I need to write this down somewhere. Maybe it'll help make sense of it all, though I doubt anything will ever explain what I experienced. I was on a business trip to Millbridge for a conference. Nothing special, just the usual quarterly meeting my company holds. I'd been to Millbridge before, but always stayed at chain hotels near the convention center. This time, everything was booked because of some festival happening the same weekend. My assistant found me a room at this place called the Holloway Hotel, about 15 minutes from downtown. The place looked decent enough online, an old Victorian-style building that had been renovated into a boutique hotel. The reviews were mostly positive, talking about the historic charm and unique character. What they didn't mention was the weird energy the place had. I arrived around 9 in the evening after a delayed flight and a painfully slow rental car process. It was already dark and a light rain had started to fall. The hotel stood at the end of a winding driveway lined with these massive oak trees that seemed to bend toward the building. I remember thinking it looked almost like they were pointing at it, warning people to stay away. Stupid thought, but that's how it felt. The lobby was dimly lit with these old brass fixtures that cast strange shadows on the deep red wallpaper. There was a musty smell, like old books mixed with something else I couldn't place. The receptionist was a thin woman with her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She barely looked up from her computer when I approached the desk. "Checking in," I said, sliding my ID and credit card across the counter. She typed something, her long fingernails clicking against the keyboard. "You're in room 303, she said, handing me an actual physical key. Not a key card, a real brass key attached to a heavy wooden tag with the room number carved into it. "Is the elevator down that hallway?" I asked, pointing to the right. She nodded without saying anything. I remember thinking it was weird how quiet the place was. No background music, no other guests in the lobby, just the sound of rain against the windows. The elevator was one of those old-fashioned kinds with the metal accordion gate you have to pull across manually. It moved slowly, creaking the entire way up to the third floor. The hallway was narrow, with faded carpet that might have been green once but had worn to a grayish color. The walls were lined with old photographs of the hotel and what I assumed were previous owners. Room 303 was at the end of the hall. The key stuck a bit in the lock, and I had to jiggle it before the door finally opened. The room was basic but clean. Queen bed with a dark wooden headboard, matching dresser, small desk by the window, and a bathroom that had been updated somewhat recently. Nothing fancy, but it would do for 2 nights. I was exhausted from traveling, so I just took a quick shower, answered some emails, and was in bed by 11. That's when things started to get weird. I woke up at what my phone said was 2:17 in the morning. The room was freezing cold. Not just cool, but bone-chillingly cold, like standing in a walk-in freezer. My breath was visible in the air. I thought maybe the AC was malfunctioning, but when I checked the ancient thermostat, on the wall, it was set to 74 degrees. That's when I first noticed the humming sound. It was faint at first, almost like the buzz of fluorescent lights, but with a rhythm to it, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed almost intentional. I put my ear against the wall, thinking it might be pipes or something from another room, but the sound didn't get any louder. I walked toward the door, and with each step the humming intensified. By the time I reached the door, it was loud enough that I wondered why it hadn't woken me earlier. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It seemed to be coming from within the walls themselves, like the building was vibrating. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, half expecting to see other guests who had been disturbed by the noise. But the corridor was empty and silent. The humming had stopped completely the moment I crossed the threshold. Confused, I stood there for a minute, wondering if I'd imagined it all. Maybe it was just some weird half-dream. I was about to go back inside when I felt a cold draft coming from the direction of the elevator. The elevator I'd taken earlier was at the opposite end of the hall, but now I noticed there was another one, older looking, with an ornate brass door that I swear hadn't been there when I checked in. I went back into my room, closing the door firmly behind me. That's when I saw her. In the corner by the window stood a woman in a tattered white nightgown. Her skin was pale to the point of being translucent, and her long dark hair hung in wet clumps around her face. She wasn't standing exactly, more like hovering a few inches above the floor. Water seemed to drip from her clothes and hair, but it vanished before hitting the carpet. I froze completely. My whole body went rigid with fear. I couldn't even scream. My throat closed up like someone was choking me. She didn't move toward me, just stood there, staring with these hollow eyes that seemed to be looking through me rather than at me. Then she spoke. Her voice was like several voices layered on top of each other, some whispering, some speaking normally. "The elevator never stops," she said. Then she raised a dripping arm and pointed at the door. I blinked, and she was gone. Just gone. No fading away, no moving. She was there 1 second and not the next. The wet spots where she had been standing were gone too. The room temperature instantly returned to normal. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk, but there was no signal. The hotel Wi-Fi that had worked fine earlier wasn't showing up on my list of networks anymore. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I threw on my jeans and a sweatshirt, shoved my feet into my shoes without bothering with socks, and grabbed my room key and wallet. There was no way I was staying in that room another minute. When I opened the door again, the humming had returned, louder than before. It seemed to be coming from the direction of that second elevator, the one I hadn't noticed earlier. Despite every instinct telling me to run in the opposite direction, I found myself walking toward it like something was pulling me. The brass doors were etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. As I got closer, the humming became more distinct, almost like chanting in some language I couldn't understand. I hadn't pressed any button, but the elevator doors slid open on their own. The inside was lined with dark wood paneling and had a small bench along the back wall. There were no buttons inside, no panel, nothing to indicate how to select a floor. I stood there, staring into the elevator, not wanting to enter but feeling compelled to. That's when I heard a voice behind me whisper, "Get out." I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the elevator, I saw a tall, dark shadow moving in the corner of the car. It wasn't shaped like a person, more like a column of smoke that had some vague human features. The humming grew so loud it felt like my head would explode. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound seemed to be inside my head now. The shadow in the elevator began to move toward the door, toward me. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond. The last thing I remember was the shadow reaching out with what looked like long, thin fingers, and the humming becoming a high-pitched scream. I woke up in the lobby, lying on one of the sofas. The same receptionist from check-in was standing over me, her face showing concern but not surprise. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, helping me sit up. "One of our night staff found you unconscious by the main stairwell." My head was pounding and I felt nauseated. "What happened? How did I get down here?" "You must have been sleepwalking," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe that any more than I did. "I was in my room, 303, I said. "There was a woman and then this elevator." The receptionist's face went pale. She glanced over her shoulder at an older man who had appeared behind the front desk. He gave her a slight nod. "Sir," she said quietly, "room 303 has been closed for renovations for years. We don't book guests there." "That's impossible. You gave me the key yourself last night." She shook her head. "You're in room 215. You checked in yesterday evening." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key with a wooden tag that clearly said 215. But I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had been in room 303. "The elevator," I said. "There was this old elevator at the end of the hall with brass doors." The man behind the desk spoke up. "The elevator has claimed another," he said, his voice oddly calm. "It never stops, and it never forgets." The receptionist shot him an angry look before turning back to me. "I'm sorry about this confusion, sir. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at another hotel. We'd be happy to refund your stay." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my belongings from room 215, which looked nothing like the room I remembered from the night before, and got out of there as fast as I could. I've never gone back to Millbridge, and I never will. But the worst part is, it hasn't left me. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I can hear that humming sound, faint but unmistakable. And twice now, when driving past old buildings with elevators, I've caught a glimpse of a pale woman in a white gown reflected in the windows. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was real or some kind of hallucination. But I know the Holloway Hotel is still there, and sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that I never really left room 303 at all. Story 15. I still can't sleep properly after what happened 3 weeks ago. I keep the lights on at night now. I've tried telling a few friends, but they just give me that look like I'm making it up or had some kind of hallucination. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was driving back from a business conference in Albuquerque, heading east on Route 66. It was mid-July, hot as hell during the day, but the night had brought a coolness that made driving with the windows down comfortable. I'd been on the road for about 5 hours straight and was getting hungry and tired. My GPS showed the next proper town was still about 40 minutes away, and I wasn't sure I could make it without at least some coffee. Around 11:30 at night, I spotted a flickering neon sign in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out the word diner with some letters periodically going dark before lighting up again. The parking lot was empty except for 2 cars, an old station wagon that looked like it had been sitting there for years, and a newer sedan parked close to the entrance. The place looked abandoned at first glance. The windows were grimy and the paint was peeling off the wooden siding, but there were lights on inside, so I figured it must be open. I pulled in, parked my car, and walked up to the entrance. A bell jingled overhead as I pushed open the door. The smell hit me first, cooking grease mixed with something sour I couldn't identify. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting an unnatural bluish glow over everything. There were about a dozen booths, all empty except for one in the far corner where a man sat hunched over a cup of coffee. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with pure white hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was wiping down the counter with a rag that had definitely seen better days. "Coffee?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah, and maybe a menu if you're still serving food," I replied, sliding onto a stool at the counter. She poured me a cup from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there for hours. The coffee was thick and bitter, but I needed the caffeine. I glanced around while she grabbed a laminated menu from beneath the counter. The place was stuck in the 70s. Faded photos of Route 66 attractions on the walls, red vinyl seats with stuffing poking through the cracks, and a jukebox in the corner that wasn't turned on. On the counter beside me was a newspaper. The date at the top read July 12th, 3 days earlier. The headline caught my eye immediately. "Mysterious disappearances along Route 66 baffle authorities." I pulled it closer and started reading. The elderly woman noticed my interest. "You traveling far?" she asked, her voice raspy from what I guessed were decades of cigarettes. "Chicago," I answered. "Still got a long way to go." She nodded slowly. "Not smart to drive these roads at night, especially not alone." Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. I forced a laugh. "Why's that? Ghosts?" She didn't smile back. "Worse things than ghosts out there." Her eyes flicked to the man in the corner. "Ask him if you don't believe me." I looked over at the man. Now that my eyes had adjusted to the dim lighting, I could see him better. He was maybe in his 40s, with several days' worth of stubble and deep circles under his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, and he kept glancing toward the windows. "What's his story?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Been here 3 days," she said. "Won't leave. Says he's afraid of what's out there." My appetite was fading fast, but I ordered a sandwich anyway, thinking it might help settle my growing unease. While I waited, I continued reading the newspaper article. It described how 5 people had vanished along this stretch of highway in the past month alone. No abandoned vehicles, no signs of struggle. They were just gone. The sandwich arrived, rubbery cheese and meat that didn't taste quite right between 2 slices of stale bread. I managed a few bites before giving up. The man in the corner kept staring at me, and finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up my coffee and walked over to his booth. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. He gestured to the seat across from him without speaking. Up close, I could see his hands were scratched and his fingernails were broken and dirty, like he'd been clawing at something. "You've been here a while," I ventured. He nodded, then leaned forward. "You need to leave, now, while you still can." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Why? What's going on?" He looked around nervously before speaking again. "Have you heard of the forgotten exit?" I shook my head. "It's not on any map, not on your GPS. It appears when you least expect it, an unmarked exit off the highway. If you take it..." He trailed off, staring into his coffee. "If you take it, what happens?" I pressed. "You end up somewhere else, somewhere wrong, a place that's lost in time. People go there and they don't come back." I almost laughed, thinking he was messing with me, but the pure terror in his eyes stopped me. "Is that what happened to you?" He nodded. 3 nights ago, I took the exit by mistake, thought it was the way to Tucumcari. The road just kept going, getting narrower, darker. Then I saw them. Them! His hands were shaking so badly now that coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup. They don't look right. Like people, but not people. They move wrong, and they're hungry." The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, and for a second, we were in darkness. When they came back on, the man's face had gone white. "It found me," he whispered, staring past me toward the entrance. I turned around slowly. Through the grimy glass of the door, I could see a figure standing in the parking lot, tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its hair hung in long, tangled strands around a face I couldn't quite make out. It didn't move like a normal person, more like it was being puppeteered by something that didn't understand how human bodies worked. The lights flickered again, and when they stabilized, the figure was closer to the door. "We need to go, now." The man grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Out the back, my car's around there." "What about her?" I nodded toward the elderly woman. "She's part of it," he hissed. "She keeps people here until they come." My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. The man was already pulling me toward a door marked "Employees Only" at the back of the diner. I glanced back at the counter. The elderly woman was gone. We burst through the door into a narrow hallway that smelled of mold and rotten meat. There was a fire exit at the end, and the man pushed it open, setting off an alarm that shrieked through the night. We ran around the side of the building to where a blue sedan was parked. "Where's your car?" he asked, fumbling with his keys. "Front lot," I said, then realized I couldn't leave it behind. "I need to get it." "There's no time." But I was already running back toward the front of the diner, staying close to the building. When I peered around the corner, I saw the figure standing by the entrance, its head tilted at an impossible angle as it looked at my car. I ducked back, my breath coming in short gasps. I had to make a decision. I waited until the figure moved toward the diner door, then sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys. I practically dove inside, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking lot with the tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man's blue sedan right behind me, and beyond that, something moving with unnatural speed along the side of the road, keeping pace with our cars. I floored it, pushing my car well past 90 miles per hour. The sedan stayed close behind. We drove like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, neither of us daring to slow down. Eventually, I saw lights ahead, a gas station still open despite the late hour. I pulled in and the sedan followed. We both sat in our cars for a minute, catching our breath before I got out. The man emerged from his car, looking slightly less terrified but still on edge. "Do you think we lost it?" I asked. He scanned the darkness behind us. "For now, but they don't give up easy." An attendant came out of the gas station, eyeing us curiously. "You boys okay? Looked like you were running from the devil himself." I glanced at the man from the diner, then back at the attendant. We stopped at a diner about 20 miles back and... "Old place with a flickering neon sign?" The attendant interrupted, his expression darkening. We both nodded. The attendant spit on the ground. "You're lucky you got out. People go in there and never come out." "You know about it?" the man asked. "Everyone around here knows to avoid it, just like we know about the forgotten exit." He lowered his voice. "Highway patrol won't even talk about it anymore. Too many of their own disappeared investigating it." I felt sick. "What about the things that follow you?" The attendant looked at me sharply. "You saw them, and you're still here?" He shook his head. "You boys need to get far away from this stretch of road, and don't stop driving until morning." We filled our tanks and bought enough caffeine to keep us awake for days. The man, I finally learned his name was Ray, decided to follow me all the way to Oklahoma City before heading north. We exchanged phone numbers, promising to check in with each other. For the rest of the drive, I kept seeing movement in my rearview mirror, shadows that moved too quickly across the road, figures standing motionless on distant hills, watching our cars pass. I never took my foot off the gas. We made it to Oklahoma City as the sun was rising. Ray and I parted ways in a Denny's parking lot, both of us looking haggard and shell-shocked. I've talked to him twice since then. He's still afraid to drive at night. I made it home safely, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I brought something back with me. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I see impossible movements. My mirrors sometimes show reflections that aren't quite right, and I keep dreaming about that unmarked exit, a road that leads somewhere humans aren't meant to go. I've looked online for information about disappearances along Route 66, about diners where people vanish, about exits that shouldn't exist. There are whispers, forum posts that get deleted within hours, missing person reports that never get resolved, but nothing concrete. All I know is that I'm never driving that route again. And if you do, stay on the main highway. Don't stop at diners with flickering lights, and whatever you do, never take an exit that isn't on your map. Some roads lead to places we're not meant to see, and some secrets are better left undiscovered. Story 16. I still can't talk about this without my hands shaking. It's been 7 years since it happened, but sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I see those headlights in my rearview mirror. Back in 2016, I was going through a pretty rough patch. I dropped out of UAB after 2.5 years because I couldn't afford it anymore, and I moved back to my hometown in rural Alabama. If you've ever lived in a small town in Alabama, you know there aren't exactly jobs falling from the sky. I was living with my mom, working at the gas station during the day, but it wasn't enough to save up and get back to school. That's when I started delivering groceries at night. This was when those apps were just getting popular, especially in rural areas where a lot of older folks couldn't drive to get their own groceries. The pay wasn't great, but I could make my own hours, and the tips were sometimes decent. Saturday night deliveries were usually the best, people ordering last-minute stuff for Sunday dinners or whatever. This particular Saturday in October, I was about to call it quits around 11 when one last order came through. The location was out on County Line Road, which is basically the middle of nowhere. It's this long stretch of road that cuts through nothing but woods and old farms, connecting two counties. Even in daylight, it's creepy as hell. Just miles of overgrown fields, abandoned barns, and thick woods right up to the road. I almost declined it, but the order was big, like $70 worth of groceries, and I figured the tip might be good. Plus, I needed every dollar I could get. I remember pulling into the Walmart parking lot, my headlights sweeping across the nearly empty lot. Inside, I grabbed everything on the list: milk, eggs, bread, canned goods, some medicine, basic stuff, nothing weird. The cashier, this older lady named Martha who always worked late shifts, looked at me funny. "You delivering all the way? Out to County Line this time of night?" she asked. I nodded and she just shook her head. "Be careful out there. That road ain't right after dark." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me as I loaded up my car. Everyone around here had stories about County Line Road. Growing up, we'd heard all kinds of stuff: people disappearing, ghost hitchhikers, lights in the woods that would follow your car. Standard small-town ghost stories, I thought. The drive out there was exactly as eerie as you'd expect. My GPS kept cutting in and out, which wasn't unusual for the area, but still annoying. The road was pitch black except for my headlights. No street lamps, no houses, nothing for miles. Just woods and the occasional broken-down fence. About 20 minutes in, my GPS told me to turn onto this gravel driveway I would have missed if I wasn't looking for it. No mailbox, no sign, just a gap in the trees with a dirt path leading away from the road. I remember hesitating, then thinking about the tip again and turning in. The driveway seemed to go on forever, winding through thick trees before finally opening up to reveal this old farmhouse. It was one of those two-story places that might have been nice 50 years ago, but now just looked worn down by time and weather. Paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, porch sagging, but there was a light on. The porch light was burning yellow, and I could see another light inside, maybe from a living room. I parked and grabbed the groceries, feeling relieved that someone was obviously home. The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked up to the porch. Each step made the old wood creak, and I remembered thinking it felt like the whole structure might collapse under me. I knocked on the door. No answer. Knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? Grocery delivery," I called out, trying to sound cheerful despite the knot in my stomach. Still nothing. I was about to knock a third time when I heard something behind me, the sound of tires on gravel. I turned around and saw headlights coming up the driveway. For a second I was relieved, thinking it was the homeowner returning. But then the blue lights started flashing, and my heart dropped. It was a police cruiser, an old Crown Victoria model. In my rearview mirror, I'd barely be able to tell it apart from any other car until those lights came on. The cruiser parked behind my car, blocking me in, and a tall figure got out. He approached slowly, deliberately. his face hidden in shadow beneath his hat. As he got closer, I could make out his uniform. It looked old-fashioned somehow, not quite like the ones our local cops wore. The fabric seemed faded, and his badge caught the porch light in a way that made it hard to read. "What are you doing here?" His voice was deep but oddly flat, like he was trying too hard to sound normal. "I'm delivering groceries," I said, holding up the bags. "Someone at this address placed an order." He stepped closer, and I got my first good look at his face. That's when the first real chill hit me. His skin was pale, almost gray in the dim light, and his eyes, they didn't look right. They were dark, but not in a normal way, more like there was nothing behind them, just empty space. "This property has been abandoned for years," he said. "No one lives here. You need to leave immediately." "But I got an order," I started to argue, pulling out my phone to show him the app. I said, "Leave." He cut me off, his hand moving to rest on his holstered gun. "Now." That shut me up quick. I nodded, set the groceries down on the porch, and hurried back to my car. The whole time I could feel his eyes on my back. When I got in and started the engine, he was still standing there, watching me. I had to make a 3-point turn to get around his cruiser, and as I passed him, I caught a glimpse of his nameplate, Miller. The entire drive back to town, I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced he was following me. But the road behind me stayed dark. When I got home around midnight, the first thing I did was check the app to see if I could report the undelivered order. That's when things got even weirder. The order was gone. Not cancelled, not marked undelivered. Just gone, like it had never existed. I scrolled through my history, my earnings for the night, everything. No trace of that last delivery. I tried to convince myself there was some glitch in the app, that I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew better. Those groceries had been real. That house had been real. And that cop, he'd been real too, even if something about him felt wrong. I barely slept that night, and the next morning I started searching online for anything about that property on County Line Road. It took some digging, but eventually I found an old news article from 1984. The headline made my blood run cold. "Family of 4 found dead in County Line farmhouse." According to the article, a man named Harold Miller had murdered his wife and 2 children before disappearing. The bodies weren't discovered for days. The article included a grainy photo of the farmhouse, the same one I'd been to the night before. But what really got me was a detail buried in the middle of the article. Witnesses reported seeing an unidentified police officer near the scene in the days before and after the murders. Local law enforcement denied having any officers in the area at those times. Harold Miller was never found. The case went cold. I should have quit that job right then, but I needed the money. So I kept delivering, but I made a rule. No more orders after dark, and absolutely nothing on County Line Road. That worked for about 2 weeks. Then things started getting weird again. Orders would suddenly change in the app while I was in the middle of delivering them, rerouting me to addresses out in the middle of nowhere. I'd get to a delivery location only to have the customer claim they never placed an order. 3 times I swear I saw that same old police cruiser parked on side roads, just waiting. The worst was when I started getting texts from unknown numbers with addresses on County Line Road. Just the address, nothing else. I blocked each number, but they kept coming from different ones. Then came the night that finally broke me. It was just after midnight and I was driving home from my other job at the gas station. I was on a back road that would eventually connect to the highway. Not county line, but still pretty remote. My headlights caught something in the road ahead and I slowed down, thinking it might be a deer. It wasn't a deer. It was him, the officer, standing in the middle of the road facing my car. He wasn't moving, just standing there with his hands at his sides. I slammed on my brakes, stopping about 20 feet from him. For what felt like forever, we just stayed like that. Me and my car, him standing there staring at me through my windshield. Then, slowly, he started walking toward my car. I don't remember consciously deciding to hit the gas. 1 second I was frozen in fear, the next I was swerving around him, flooring it down the road. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. He didn't chase me. He didn't need to. He knew where to find me. I quit the delivery job that night, called my boss at the gas station too, and told him I couldn't come in anymore. 2 days later, I packed everything I could fit in my car and moved 3 hours away to live with my cousin. It's been 7 years, and I've never gone back to that town. I don't deliver anything anymore. I don't drive on empty roads at night, and I've never again looked up anything about Harold Miller or that house on County Line Road. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone inside that house that night, or if I'd stopped when he was standing in the road. Was he a ghost? Was he Harold Miller himself, somehow still alive and using that officer disguise? Or was it something else entirely? Something using the delivery app to lure people out to that abandoned property in the middle of nowhere? I don't know, and I never want to find out. All I know is that sometimes when I'm driving at night and see headlights behind me, I hold my breath until they pass, and I never ever look to see if they're attached to a Crown Victoria. Story 17. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm not usually the type to believe in the supernatural, but what happened at Lost Pines Lake last year has completely changed me. I still get goosebumps thinking about it, and I've been having nightmares almost every night since. It was spring break during my junior year at Cornell. My friends and I had been planning a camping trip for weeks, just a simple weekend getaway to unwind from midterms. There were 5 of us. Me, Jake, Alyssa, Priya, and Damon. We'd all been friends since freshman year, except for Priya, who was Jake's girlfriend of 6 months. We weren't hardcore campers by any means, just college kids looking to escape campus for a bit. We borrowed Damon's dad's SUV and loaded it up with tents, coolers, and probably way too much beer. The plan was to head to one of the popular camping spots in the Finger Lakes region, about 2 hours from campus. I remember being excited, but also kind of anxious. I've always been the cautious one in our group. About an hour and a half into our drive, we hit a detour, road work or something. Honestly, I was half asleep in the back seat when it happened. Jake was driving and took an alternate route that Google Maps suggested. That's when things started feeling off. The road got narrower and less maintained. Trees pressed in on both sides, creating this tunnel effect that made me uneasy. We hadn't seen another car for at least 20 minutes. "Guys, are we sure this is right?" I remember asking. "Relax, Morgan," Jake said, eyes glued to his phone. "GPS says we're good." Then we came to this small, weathered wooden sign, Lost Pines Road. It was barely visible among the overgrowth and looked like it had been there for decades. Something about it made my stomach knot up. "I don't know about this," I said. "Maybe we should turn around and find another way." "Come on, Chen, don't be such a buzzkill," Damon called from the back. "This is an adventure." I should have pushed harder. I should have insisted we turn around. But I didn't want to be the paranoid one, so I just shut up and stared out the window as we turned onto the gravel path. The road wound through dense forest for about 15 minutes before suddenly opening up to this absolutely gorgeous clearing. There was a lake, not huge but decent sized, with water so clear you could see straight to the bottom near the shore. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting this golden orange light across everything. It was breathtaking. "Holy shit," Alyssa whispered. "This place is incredible." And it was. Perfect, almost. Too perfect, like something out of a travel magazine. We pulled up near the shoreline and piled out of the car, stretching and taking in the scenery. There wasn't another soul around. No other campers, no cabins visible on the opposite shore, nothing. Just us and this pristine lake surrounded by tall pines. We set up camp quickly, pitching our tents in a semicircle facing the water. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, painting the lake in these vibrant pinks and oranges. We decided to take a quick swim before dark. The water was cold but refreshing after the drive. I remember floating on my back, looking up at the sky turning purple, and feeling this strange sensation, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar place and tried to push it aside. After drying off, we built a fire and cracked open some beers, the typical college camping trip stuff, eating slightly burnt, hot dogs, telling ghost stories, laughing too loud. But as the night got darker, I kept getting this feeling that something was wrong. At one point, I walked down to the lake's edge to get away from the noise for a minute. The water was so still it looked like glass, perfectly reflecting the full moon and stars. That's when I saw it, a shadowy figure in the water's reflection, standing right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell, but there was nothing there, just the trees and our campsite a few yards away. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was just shadows from the fire playing tricks, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't tell my friends what I saw. They were all buzzed and having fun, and I didn't want to ruin the vibe with my weird paranoia. We eventually called it a night around 2 in the morning, crawling into our tents. I was sharing with Alyssa, and despite my unease, I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The tent was freezing, and at first I thought that's what had woken me. But then I heard it, someone calling my name, not shouting but almost singing it. Morgan. I sat up, thinking it was one of my friends playing a prank, but Alyssa was sound asleep beside me. The voice came again, soft and feminine, from the direction of the lake. Morgan, please help me. I should have woken Alyssa up. I should have stayed in that tent. But something compelled me to unzip the tent and step outside. The campfire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see by. The full moon reflected off the lake, creating this eerie pathway of light across the water. And there she was, a woman standing at the lake's edge, her back to me. She wore what looked like a white dress, soaking wet and clinging to her thin frame. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes down her back. "Hello," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you okay?" She turned slightly, just enough for me to catch the profile of her face. She was young, maybe my age or a little older, and beautiful in a haunting sort of way. Her skin was so pale it seemed to glow in the moonlight. "I need your help," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. "Please come closer." I took a few steps toward her, drawn by something I couldn't explain. That's when I noticed she wasn't standing on the shore. She was standing on the water, just a few inches above the surface. Fear froze me in place. I wanted to run back to my tent, but I couldn't move. She reached a hand toward me, and I saw water dripping from her fingertips, even though she'd been standing there for several minutes. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Someone who's been waiting for you," she replied, and her voice had this echo to it that made my skin crawl. "I've been so alone here. I need you to help me leave this place." Just then, I heard the zipper of another tent. Jake emerged, rubbing his eyes. "Morgan? Who are you talking to?" he called, walking toward me. I pointed toward the woman, but when I looked back, she was gone. The lake's surface was completely still, as if nothing had disturbed it. "There was someone there," I insisted, my voice shaking. "A woman in white, standing on the water." Jake looked at me like I was crazy. "You were probably sleepwalking, dude. Come on, let's get back to sleep. It's freezing out here." I let him lead me back to my tent, but I knew I hadn't been dreaming. I lay awake until dawn, listening for that voice again, but it never came. The next morning, I was exhausted and on edge, but everyone else was in high spirits, excited to spend the day swimming and hiking. I didn't mention what happened. I could already imagine their reactions. Instead, I tried to convince myself it had been a vivid dream or my mind playing tricks. After breakfast, we all decided to swim. The lake was even more beautiful in daylight, crystal clear with a sandy bottom that gradually deepened. I was hesitant to go in, but seeing everyone else enjoying themselves made me feel silly for being scared. I waded in slowly, the cold water numbing my feet and calves. I'd gone about waist deep when I heard it again. My name called from beneath the water's surface. I froze, looking down, and for a split second, I swear I saw her face looking up at me from the bottom of the lake, her eyes wide and pleading, her mouth forming my name. though no bubbles escaped her lips. I screamed and scrambled backward, falling and going completely under for a moment. When I resurfaced, gasping and coughing, my friends were all staring at me. "Snake," I lied, my voice trembling. "I thought I saw a snake in the water." We left shortly after that. I made up some excuse about feeling sick, and thankfully Priya backed me up, saying maybe we should head back early anyway. As we packed up our gear, I kept glancing at the lake, and just before we drove away, I saw her again. The woman in white, shimmering beneath the surface, watching me leave with what looked like utter despair on her face. The dreams started that night. The woman reaching for me, her face twisted in sorrow, whispering that I abandoned her. Night after night, I'd wake up gasping, feeling like I was drowning. I became obsessed with finding out what happened. I researched the area, looking for any reports of drownings or missing persons, but found nothing about a lost Pines Lake. According to official maps, it didn't even exist. For months, I tried to forget about it. I threw myself into schoolwork, avoided camping or even swimming, but the dreams wouldn't stop, and this overwhelming sense of guilt followed me everywhere. I knew I had to go back. When summer break came, I made the drive alone. My friends thought I was crazy when I told them what I was doing, but I had to know. I had to understand what happened. Finding the lake again wasn't easy. I took wrong turns twice before finally spotting that weathered sign for Lost Pines Road. The gravel path seemed more overgrown than before, as if rarely used. The lake was exactly as I remembered, pristine and beautiful in the afternoon light. I parked and sat in my car for nearly an hour, working up the courage to get out. When I finally did, the silence was oppressive. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, just the occasional ripple on the water's surface. I walked slowly to the shore, my heart hammering in my chest. "I'm here," I called out, feeling ridiculous but desperate. "I came back." At first, nothing happened. Then the water began to stir, ripples forming in a circle about 10 feet from shore. She rose slowly, water cascading from her white dress, her dark hair plastered to her skull. This time, she came fully out of the water, hovering just above the surface as she approached. "You left me," she said, her voice clearer now, but still with that underwater quality. "You took my life when you left." "I don't understand," I said, my voice breaking. "Who are you? What happened to you?" "I am bound to this lake," she said, drawing closer. "I have been for a very long time, but when you came, I thought you could help me. I thought you could see me." "I do see you," I whispered. "Yes," she smiled, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. "You do. That's why I called to you. So few can see those who are trapped between." That's when I understood. This lake was some kind of portal or thin spot between the living and lost souls. The woman hadn't drowned recently. She'd been there for who knows how long, invisible to most people who passed through. "How can I help you?" I asked. "By acknowledging me," she said simply. "By seeing me and remembering me. Those who are forgotten remain trapped." I knelt at the water's edge, trembling but no longer afraid. "I see you," I said. "I'll remember you, I promise." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, and reached out as if to touch my cheek, though her hand stopped just short. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she began to fade, growing transparent until all that remained was a slight disturbance on the water's surface. The oppressive silence lifted, and suddenly I could hear birds singing and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I drove home that day with this profound sense that I'd witnessed something few ever do, the connection between lives separated by the boundaries of life and death. I still dream about her sometimes, but the dreams aren't frightening anymore. They're reminders of a promise I made. I don't know who she was or how long she'd been trapped there, I don't know if there are others like her in that lake or in other forgotten places, but I know what I saw, and I know it was real, and I'll keep my promise to remember her, to acknowledge that she existed. That's why I'm sharing this now, because maybe remembering isn't enough. Maybe her story needs to be told. Story 18. I've been putting off writing this for almost 4 months now. It's still hard to think about, let alone talk about, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar, or maybe writing this will help me make sense of what happened. I don't know. I worked, at Jenny's Diner in Ashburn, Virginia. It's your typical small-town place where everybody knows everybody. I've lived in Ashburn my whole life, 23 years of the same faces, same streets, same routines. Never thought anything genuinely terrifying could happen here. This all went down back in October. It was a Thursday night, and I was closing up at the diner. October in Virginia can get chilly, and that night was particularly foggy, the kind where your headlights just bounce back at you. My shift had run late because we had a rush of hungry teenagers after some football game. By the time I clocked out, it was almost 1 in the morning. The drive home isn't usually anything special, about 15 minutes through some back roads past the old Miller farm and through a stretch that cuts alongside those woods everyone tells their kids to stay out of. I was exhausted, playing the radio loud to keep myself awake when I saw the flashing blue lights in my rearview mirror. My first thought was, shit, was I speeding? I hadn't been drinking, so I wasn't worried about that, but I was tired enough that maybe I'd been drifting a little. I pulled over onto the shoulder, right at that spot where the woods come right up to the road. The fog was so thick I could barely see the police cruiser behind me, just those blue lights cutting through the mist. I rolled down my window and got my license ready. Through my side mirror, I could see someone approaching, tall, wearing what looked like a police uniform. But as soon as he came up to my window, something felt wrong. It's hard to explain that feeling when your instincts scream at you, but your brain can't process why. His uniform looked like our local police, but it sat on him all wrong, like it was a size too big. The badge on his chest was so scratched up I couldn't read it. No name tag. He had this wide-brimmed hat pulled down low over his face. "License," he said. "Just that. No license and registration, or do you know why I pulled you over?" His voice was flat, emotionless. When I handed him my license, his hand brushed against mine, and it was ice cold. Not just cool from the night air, I mean like touching a corpse cold. That's when I looked up at his face and saw his eyes. God, those eyes. They were just empty, dark pits that seemed to go on forever. Not bloodshot, not dilated, just wrong, like someone had cut holes in a mask and you were seeing nothing but shadow behind them. It sounds dramatic, but it was like looking at a shadow wearing a person's skin. He took my license and walked back to his cruiser. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I kept trying to see him in my mirrors, but the fog was too thick, and the blue lights were making everything distorted. Then, and this is the part that still gives me nightmares, he was suddenly at my passenger window. I didn't see him walk up, no footsteps, no movement in my mirrors. He was just there, staring in at me through the glass. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Step out of the vehicle," he said, his mouth barely moving. Every instinct in my body was screaming not to get out of that car, but he was a cop, right? What was I supposed to do? Run? I tried to stall. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Step out of the vehicle." Each word was separate, deliberate. So I did. My legs felt like jelly as I stood on the road. The fog had gotten even thicker, and I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Just those damn blue lights pulsing from his cruiser and the dark outline of the woods. "Walk," he said, pointing toward the tree line. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, certain I'd misheard him. "Walk into the woods." His face remained completely expressionless. This was the moment I knew beyond any doubt that something was horribly wrong. No legitimate traffic stop involves directing someone into the woods at 1 in the morning. But he had his hand resting on his holster, and I was terrified of what would happen if I refused. So I started walking, very slowly, toward the edge of the woods. He followed about 6 feet behind me. I could feel his presence more than hear him. He moved silently, unnaturally quiet for someone his size. The woods were pitch black. The only light came from the occasional glimpse of his cruiser's lights through the fog and trees. We walked for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 10 minutes. My mind was racing, calculating my chances of running, wondering if anyone would hear me scream out here. We reached a small clearing and he stopped. "Here," he said. That's when he reached into the darkness beside a large oak tree and pulled out a shovel. A fucking shovel. It was old and rusty, like it had been sitting out there for years. He tossed it at my feet. "Dig," he ordered. My blood turned to ice. I was being told to dig my own grave. There was no other explanation. This wasn't a cop. This was something else entirely. I picked up the shovel with trembling hands, my mind desperately searching for a way out, and then it hit me. The oldest trick in the book, but I had nothing else. I need to use the bathroom first," I stammered. He stared at me with those hollow eyes for what felt like an eternity. Then, without changing his expression, he nodded slightly. I set down the shovel and walked a few steps away towards some bushes, making a show of undoing my belt. As soon as I was partly obscured by the bushes, I bolted. I just ran as fast and as hard as I've ever run in my life, crashing through the underbrush. I heard him behind me almost immediately. No shouting, no "stop or I'll shoot," just the sound of something, moving through the woods with unnatural speed. Branches whipped at my face, and I tripped more than once, but pure adrenaline kept me going. I had no idea where I was running. The woods were disorienting and the fog had seeped between the trees. But I must have been running in roughly the right direction, because after what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw the faint glow of the road through the trees. I burst out of the woods about 100 yards down from where my car was parked. The police cruiser's lights were still flashing, cutting blue streaks through the fog. Without looking back, I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys, expecting at any moment to feel a hand on my shoulder, or worse. I got the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. As I jammed the key into the ignition, I finally looked in my rearview mirror. There he was, standing at the edge of the woods, perfectly still, watching me. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't even trying to pursue me, just standing there staring. I peeled out of there so fast I nearly went into the ditch on the other side of the road. I drove home well over the speed limit, constantly checking my mirrors, but there were no blue lights following me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my locked apartment with all the lights on, a kitchen knife next to me, trying to make sense of what had happened. By morning, I'd convinced myself that I needed to report this to the real police. The station was quiet when I walked in around 9 in the morning. I asked to speak to someone about a frightening encounter with an officer the previous night. They took me seriously, more seriously than I expected. 2 officers exchanged glances when I described the location, and I was quickly ushered into an interview room with Detective Marquez. I told her everything, the weird uniform, the missing name tag, those eyes, the shovel. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Have you lived here your whole life?" she finally asked. I nodded. "But you've never heard about Deputy Harris?" The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head. She sighed and leaned forward. "About 15 years ago, a deputy named Thomas Harris disappeared during a routine traffic stop. It was on that same stretch of road where you were last night." My skin went cold. His cruiser was found with the lights still flashing, but no sign of him. The case was never solved. She paused. "Since then, there have been reports. People claim they've been pulled over by a tall officer with no name tag, usually late at night, always in foggy conditions." "What happened to those people?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Most of them drove away when things felt off. A few got out of their vehicles but then fled like you did." Another pause. "2 people have gone missing after reporting similar encounters. We've never found them." I sat there, stunned. "Are you saying I was pulled over by a ghost?" Detective Marquez didn't answer directly. I'm saying you did the right thing by trusting your instincts and getting out of there, and I strongly recommend you avoid that road at night from now on. I quit my job at the diner that day. Couldn't handle the late shifts anymore, knowing I'd have to drive that road. I found work at a bakery instead, early mornings, home before dark. I've tried researching Deputy Harris online, but there's surprisingly little information. A few old newspaper articles, a brief mention in a book about unsolved mysteries in Virginia. Nothing that explains what I encountered. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and see police lights in the distance, my heart nearly stops. I take a different route home now, the long way around, adding 20 minutes to my commute. It's worth it. The strangest part? Just last week, I was taking out the trash at dusk when I looked down the street and saw a flash of blue lights in the distance, just for a second. I live in a completely different part of town now, miles from those woods. But I swear those lights were there, and then gone. I don't know what pulled me over that night. I don't know if it was the ghost of Deputy Harris or something else entirely, something wearing his uniform, using his story. All I know is that I was meant to disappear in those woods, to become another missing person, another mystery. And sometimes, late at night, I can't help but wonder, is he still out there, waiting for me to take that road again? Still standing in those woods with that rusty shovel, waiting for someone to dig?